Welcome to Covering Our Bases. Yes, from Mets to Mariners, we break down baseball's biggest headlines and highlights with unique context from every MLB team's perspective. Now, as we cover our bases, we aim to educate, entertain, and engage the average baseball fan who just doesn't have the time to follow the other 29 teams around the league. Expect the fun storylines, patterns, predictions, and pageantry of Major League Baseball to be present at all times. He over there is NL Dan Harrow. I'm AL Warren Sprague. And Dan, we finally made it, man. Congratulations. The majority of the season is behind us. This is the last show of the regular season. I'm proud of us. Congratulations. Legitimately, we made it through. And we've seen some big names fall out of contention once and for all for playoffs. Some of these were pretty obvious, so I didn't include them in the list, but the ones that were on the fringe from our last conversation but have since fallen off: San Francisco Giants, Cincinnati Reds, St. Louis Cardinals, buddy. The Texas Rangers are defending champions, won't make the bracket. And of course, whom I called done a couple weeks ago, the Toronto Blue Jays. All deserve one poured out. There's some surprising teams still in, and perhaps most surprising among them are the Chicago Cubs, who may just be seconds away, you guys, from losing their opportunity to go to the postseason and seeing the Brewers be the first team to clinch their division. I give you all this information, Dan, to just kind of ask, since our last talk, how are you feeling about which teams have fallen out? Which teams have fallen out, and is there any surprises left for who's still in?
Yeah, it's been a wild season, Warren, and definitely some surprising names on that list that you just read off. If I had to pick one of the teams that are basically out of it that I would say is most surprising, the Cardinals were my pick, obviously, but we've seen how the season has gone, so that's a lot less surprising at this point. I think there was a belief that the Rangers would pull out of it with pitchers and some more active players coming back healthy in the second half of the year. There was really a hope, especially with some of the acquisitions they made, that they would be able to at least get into the postseason. The reality is, even though they're kind of never really had a shot for it due to the race in the AL Central, the Mariners' better record really had Texas out of it the whole time anyway. So we talked about the chances of having both World Series participants last year not in the dance. Arizona is still very much in it, but Texas, I think, is a shocker for me. Does one of them stand out to you?
Well, I'm definitely heartbroken for the Texas Rangers from like an objective baseball standpoint that they don't get to have a chance to defend their title. I think it's always a little sad when the previous year's champ can't make it to that opportunity. So I do want to be honest with that. I'm proud that Seattle's story gets to be at least slightly less sad than Texas's for only that reason, if I'm being honest. In terms of the surprises for who also didn't make it this year, I might be throwing my entire behavior down the drain, but I mean, Toronto looked like the team most likely from the group we just discussed that knew who they were well enough to make the postseason this year. You have to call them the biggest disappointment. I had lofted them as kind of the like gatekeepers, right, of the American League playoff bracket, the ones that you needed to be better than to have that shot. And they just didn't turn out to be that potent this year. And even though we saw great steps forward from guys like Dalton Varsho, and we're seeing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. remind us that he can carry a lineup late in the season here, it's just, you have to chalk it up to being a huge disappointment. And now that they're redoubling down on that core, you have to wonder if they're insane, as we've talked about in shows past. So Toronto, I think, is the biggest shocker. I kind of hope the Reds would also be able to show enough different elements to their game to bust into the bracket this year, but they are still just a little undercooked. And you might say Seattle, in my standpoint, is another one, though they're not officially eliminated. More on that soon. But what a wonderful year. It's been fun, like comparing where our predictions were and seeing, actually, we're not as stupid as we thought we were. And I know I said that last week, but we'll really get to highlight that next week when the season officially comes to the close. We're also going to talk a little bit about what the playoff bracket looks like and whom we think is most vulnerable to those first week buys or those first round buys being most detrimental to them. It's no real blessing the last couple of years that you end up with a buy. And we'll talk about why more next week. But this week, Dan, This is it. Our
It's
final vibe check, my guy.
whoa.
I know. I'm so proud of us, man. We really did do it all the way through. Thank you guys for being very cooperative and patient with our various recording fluctuations. Next year, we can expect maybe doing it every 2 weeks might be a good clip for us. And well, we'll play with the formula. But thank you for those who have stuck with us and watched the show and being patient with all our talking, because we just can't help but have a pretty unedited conversation. Let's get into this week's, Dan.
Let's do it.
More Mets colors in the background. It's fair. They were better than the Mariners one more time, and I'm blessed to think that one of us, Dan, might make the playoffs, though there's a chance we both will, and there's a chance we both won't. Lots
Yes.
to discuss today, but your colors in the background means that the Mets had a better week, and at 9-5, congrats on that. You do get to be the first one to call out the poopiest team in the league at number 30, the lowest vibes around the league. And hey, let's see if you hit us with a surprise or if we just get the usual dump teams out of the way first. The timer's on. Who's number 30, Dan? Who's got the worst vibes in the league?
So, Warren, a lot of my vibes this week are going to be circulating around the postseason, how far out teams are, and how the end of the season is kind of looking for them.
Cool.
So, not necessarily low hanging fruits, but it depends based off of the team. So, for the
Sure.
bottom of the list for me, it's going to have to be, I think, Warren, and a little bit of suspense. The Los Angeles Angels.
Ooh, dastardly. I don't blame you, though. You want to talk about a team being lowest in the basement at this stage of the season based on expectations. And you could argue Miami, having been a playoff team just last year, maybe fit better here, but it's just another abysmal week for the Angels. And honestly, if we look through it, I believe, bar none, they had the worst record of the week. Yes, worse than the White Sox, who they're currently embroiled in a series with. They lost series to Texas and Minnesota, got swept by Houston, and split 2 games with the Dodgers in what was undoubtedly the highlight of their week. Sad for the Angels once again to be coming to another listless end of a season. Talk to us on your perspective, Dano.
Yeah, it's been the drop off in the offense these last 2 weeks that has really sank them. It's not like the Angels were really playing for anything other than chances for players for next year and just development. And that's why we saw them cut ties with a lot of contracts they wouldn't have to pay and call up a lot of younger players. I mean, currently, the most experienced player on the roster is Brandon Drury. And after that, it's basically 2 to 3 years of experience at the most, and then rookies. So the drop off in record is expected. But you could see the record, the last 14 games of 4-10, Warren. It's just that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of baseball, I should say, that really can crush a culture. You've seen drop offs offensively from guys like Nito and Ohapi recently, where we haven't seen that from them over the course of the season. Probably a question I'd ask you, Warren. You've probably seen a few of these games. Is that more of maybe just natural wear and tear from the full length of an MLB season for these younger players? Or is there something else going on there? Is it a Ron Washington thing or just the culture seeping through to the rest of the players?
You know what's fun is that we're obviously coming to the end of a season that's been empty for the Angels for about a month, right? So I honestly think while some excellent teams are slowing down their jets so as to conserve energy for the postseason, LA is slowing down their jets because what's the bloody point of overdrive right now? I don't think a Neto or a Hoppy are bad players. I think what they're just done with a campaign that wasn't working out in their favor anyway. Now, I think everybody and their mom can still look at all the youthful talent on this roster and still think there's hope, or can still think, well, can the pieces that they've compiled on this youthful level be able to come together to be a lineup that can win baseball games in future years? In other words, is Neto and Ohapi and Rengifo, are they enough? Is Ward really the core outfield bat that's going to, win the day eventually? Is Mickey Moniak, former number 1 pick, going to develop into a top player at any point, though he's shown flashes of it, especially late in the season? The question becomes, hey, is this really who we think can win? And how long do you wait for Trout to be the nucleus of that? It's a tough place to be, and we already knew that. I'm not saying anything new. My hope is that an Angels team can continue to mature with the pieces that they have, but others might look at this and think that a Shanuel or a Neto or an Ohapi or a Renhefo or XYZ just aren't doing enough, and then they're blowing it up again anyway. I don't know about you, Dan. Would you rather see? I mean, I don't mind seeing this nucleus try to grow up. I really don't.
Right.
I just don't. I don't have a problem with watching this be the team, but are they going to win the division with these guys? Not
Well,
in the next 3 or 4 years, I would think. What's your perception? Would you want to see any of these pieces moved to teams more ready to win? Maybe a Neto and Ohapi really are the best. Renhefo would have been moved, we think, except he got injured just before the trade deadline. So, yeah, what's your take?
I think that's why the vibes are so low, Warren. I think you're right. There's more than just a nucleus. Like, you have the core of a solid team there. You have money invested in players who aren't playing, like Trout and Rendon, and there's nothing you can do about that. But if you stand back objectively of all these players that are going to return next year, Trout has been open about taking a lesser role, maybe not center field. I think that in reality would be a DH role for Mike Trout, which would be kind of sad. But if that's what he could bring to the team next year and stay healthy, then my thing I'm looking at with this team is just the pitching side of things. The offensive drop off is not unexpected if you have, like you said, basically a month to throw away. But if you can bring in pitchers that can really support these players who are not offensively inept, that alone is going to improve the Angels' record enough to get them closer to 500. And then, like you're saying, you're more in the race. You can play more engaging baseball. You have something to chase after at the end of the year. I think that's where they really need to focus. I would hate to see them ship off members of this team for short-term returns or just another position player. Like, that's not the investment I want to see in this team going forward. So it'll be a big offseason for them. We'll see what changes they make. But if you're a player on this team right now, I think your head's hanging pretty low.
Yeah, and you don't wish that for them, but you have a good point. As much as I tend to focus on the offensive aspects of the game because I like hitting, it's not that I don't like pitching, especially being a Seattle fan. I think I'm a little spoiled that way. But what I'll say regarding the pitching before we move on to the Angels, because they've gotten enough time, is that the Angels sit in such a low doldrum of the pitching level or pitching rankings throughout the league that at 19 in the number of hits allowed, that's their most what's the word I'm looking for? Positive figure. Everywhere else, man, this team is like the 29th, right? The 29th in strikeouts. They're the the 27th in innings pitched. That's not the most helpful, but give me a moment, because like 26th in runs, 26th in earned runs. Their ERA is just abysmal. 26th there too. So you're right.
No help. They have no pitchers ranked in the top 50. Tyler Anderson is 69. I mean, and his ERA is 3.6. Like, how can you win?
He was the Angels all-star with those figures.
Right.
Yeah. You're right. So I think the household, right, my fiance being the Angels fan she is, has talked about how pitching has been the Achilles heel of any positivity for Los Angeles Angels baseball for years. And they keep drafting, right? Remember a couple years ago, they were the target of a scandal because their, minor league pitchers were sleeping on top of each other in their very low level housing circumstances out there. Like, this is a team that's got pitchers in the system. They're just not capable of developing them, ?
Yeah, the system might be broken.
Yes. And that is what we've been saying about the Angels in a microcosm for the last, 5 years or so. So no news is different. Isn't that a shame? And we've given them far too much time when you realize that. So bye, Anaheim. Good luck figuring it out next year. I don't have a ton of faith. The 29th worst vibes in the league, Dan, does belong to the Miami Marlins that I mentioned at the top of the show, only because expectations after a playoff year last year would have had this team somewhere else in contention this year. But no, they did not put it all together. Jake Berger's the lone J out there, still doing what we've known them to do all year, their absolute best. But they did have a bit more of a winning clip than we're used to with a 5-9 week. They made it to 29 home wins, with the
Wow.
exciting, I know, dude, with the very exciting, by the
Is
way,
that
victory over the Dodgers
I'm
yesterday. Go ahead.
sorry. Is that
Yeah.
it? It's okay. It's not. They have 29 home wins. The White
Yes.
Sox are at 36 wins. So I just have to check just to say
Right.
that's insane.
It's insane. Yeah. No, definitely figures of abysmal nature come out of Miami and Chicago alike, but Miami's expectations after last year could have had them somewhere else higher had they been able to continue positive momentum. But they split series with Washington. They did split with Philadelphia in what was maybe their claim to fame this week before getting
Thank you,
swept.
Miami.
Exactly. Yeah, you'll have something nice to say for a change. It's how they avoided the basement. They did go 0-3 to Pittsburgh after that, when Pittsburgh had already discovered they were listless. Talk about another team I could have included in the list at the top of the show, guys. Yes, Pittsburgh's out. We get it. I have to look to see if it was officially in December or September or August for my prediction at the beginning of the year, but I'm getting too focused on myself. Anyway, they also lost 3 of 4, the Marlins did, to Washington. So the fact that they took game 1 against the Dodgers was kind of cool. And they can still win baseball games, as anybody can when the bats wake up and catch fire. However, the Marlins are still a disappointment this season, and I've said why. Dan, your thoughts one more time on Miami.
Yeah, I won't rehash what I said at the start of the year, but this is pretty much where I expected Miami to land. I will say I'm pretty happy with the way that they're handling this rebuild, because that's what it is. New GM comes in, basically tearing down the team and doing his own version of this half rebuild they've been doing ever since they traded Christian Yelich. So I think that they've made a lot of the right moves. They have totally restocked the cabinet in terms of their prospect pool, and that's moving in the right direction. So those are all really positive. I think you are right to have them down here, Warren. It's worth noting that 5 wins in the last 2 weeks is better than we saw from these Marlins at several points throughout the season. And overall, they have played better baseball in the second half, even though it's still not necessarily playing good baseball. I got to say, though, you kind of broke my heart there. You just made me realize all of our Jays are gone, Warren. It didn't even occur to me, but you're right. We got Jake Berger, and that's it. What happened? What happened, Miami?
The nucleus they created didn't lead to positive momentum early in the season, and they allowed it to snowball into negative territory. Now, the same thing we said at the top of the season could be true. They didn't have Sandy Alcantara. They knew that. They knew this wasn't the team that was going to be Miami's final form. But when you had the various lineup capable to still win baseball games, you see teams like Milwaukee overcoming that. For example, you see teams like Cleveland overcoming that. So there's no excuse, truthfully, for why you couldn't continue to have an offense potent enough to push through those barriers, at least on paper. It's just a lack of competitive edge, I think, this year was the choice for Miami to be this bad. Next year, maybe, and years after, perhaps they'll be more competitive. And from that aspect, their vibes can't be the basement. They're not the Angels. Maybe they should have even topped out a couple other cultures, but maybe we'll get to those shortly. That's a pretty good place to leave Miami, if you would agree. What do you want to say for number 28, Dan?
Yeah, so sticking on these bad vibes, you won't be surprised to see this one, or maybe you will, Warren. It's going to be the San Francisco Giants.
Whoa, this is a basement spot for San Francisco that honestly I didn't quite anticipate. 5-8 week, not very bueno. We understand, having lost series to Arizona and Milwaukee, getting swept by the Padres, clearly told that they have no place in playoffs. Now, they did get a 2-1 victory over San Diego earlier in the week. That was kind of plucky, and did get to beat Baltimore last night. But we'll talk about how Baltimore seems to be coming in for one of those soft landings I mentioned as recent as last week. But man, even worse than Colorado, even worse than the White Sox. Fascinating. Why, from this perspective or your perspective, are the Giants even more abysmal?
I think even as recently as 2 weeks ago, Warren, I think they had hope. I think there was real hope that the team could make a run with the strength of schedule they had remaining. Yeah. And I think that's all but evaporated over these last 2 weeks. And they're now 10 games out of a playoff spot, and they have no chance. They're not mathematically eliminated, but it's not going to happen for the Giants. And it's unfortunate because this coincides with a kind of, I don't want to say resurgence, but just reemergence of Blake Snell. refinding his form and really locking it in. Logan Webb has continued to be consistent, and it's just been a lot of the same story for the Giants. And yeah, that hope kind of fizzled out over these last 2 weeks. And probably like the cherry that kicks him down a little bit further for me, Warren. I was a little surprised to hear that Matt Chapman signed a huge extension with the Giants, but it turns out that their general manager, who we've had a ton of discussion about all these player decisions he's made this year, it turns out that he reportedly got into an argument, essentially disagreements, when discussing this contract extension with Chapman's agent, Scott Boras. Mm-hmm. And it got to a point where they were at a standstill. They could not advance the talks any further, and talks were basically going to break down. At which point, ownership got in contact with Buster Posey, who was a part of the ownership team, and basically asked him, because having a relationship with Matt Chapman, if there's anything he could do to help. He essentially came in and kind of like took over negotiations. Wow. It is worth noting that the GM cannot talk to the player. They have to talk to the agent, right? Buster Posey does not have that restriction. He's not a GM. He was able to talk to Matt Chapman directly, and when the deal was announced, that was the main thing I found surprising, was Boras having this deal signed before he could potentially get max value in the offseason. This very much looked like an example of Matt Chapman telling Boras, this is what I want. Let's get it done. And I think that's kind of a reaction to what we saw with the whole Jordan Montgomery situation.
Okay.
But on the inverse side of things, this is such a bad look, Warren, for the general manager, for Zaidi, for the Giants. I mean, he might lose his job before the season's even over. Like, this is a really bad look for him. And if you kind of just take his last 5 years in charge and the trajectory the Giants have gone on, it's been pretty sour. So to hear something like this, as a Giants fan, it would make me think about all of those free agents we missed out on the last 3-4 years running. Like when we had a chance, they had a chance at Judge, they had a chance at Correa. I mean, the list goes on, and they were just turned away. So pretty low vibes that it's kind of come out that that's where this is coming from. Mm-hmm. But a chance that he could get fired, and Warren, that could be a huge improvement for this team, culture-wise.
Hey, I've suggested how they could be even worse than the Rockies in the next couple of years. So if a big fat change like that is on the way to be ahead of that horrible negativity I just suggested would come about, right? I've chatted about how I haven't been impressed with the way they run this team, and it's all coming full circle. I think it's only natural that we find ourselves having this type of conversation, and may San Francisco be able to plant new seeds to grow a different culture, because we've smelled this coming. So I'm pleasantly not surprised of the turmoil you're suggesting. This team doesn't do it for me a whole lot. I do like the plethora of young talent we try to acknowledge week in and week out that, play with heart. And, it's just not worked out for them, period. In a year where I don't think the right decisions were made for them to truly be competitive after all. You know what I mean? Truly. There were a couple guys who were trying to fight against that, like Chapman and his team leading offensive war. And there was, the great story of Jordan Wicks being transitioned, not Jordan Wicks, that's Chicago Cubs, Jordan Hicks being successfully transitioned into a starting pitcher. We've given love to that. Heliot Ramos is better than San Francisco deserves, one might say, and it's just been a disjointed effort. Let's see if they can get back on track, set their organization straight, and be more competitive. But what do you think, man? Plus or minus 3 years before the Giants might be a playoff-bound team again. Plus or minus? Can you take a stab at it?
Plus, and okay. Warren, I would say in 3 years, the Rockies might have a better record than the Giants. I know that's crazy.
Wow.
But you pushed me on the ledge, so I'm jumping off.
I love it. Could there be a long-term descent into the quagmire that is mediocrity for the Giants? We'll have to see if an entire organization shift is on the way that could discourage that from being the case. Dan, I get to go next. And I was going to put some low-hanging fruit here. I really, truly was. But I think it's more appropriate at this point that a different kind of fruit get acknowledged, one that really had a shot as recent as 2 weeks as well in the National League race, and now finds themselves, I believe, with the outcome that just came about, mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. Ladies and
Yes.
gentlemen, our first spoiler of the day goes to the Oakland Athletics, who just toppled 5-3 a Chicago Cubs team. That will be my next team to discuss, because those Cubs that I had potentially winning the National League Central Division, are done. They are
They're
done.
done.
They just lost
Official.
to the Athletics
We're not
officially.
late.
We're not late. We're on time, baby. This one needs to be reported right now at 27. The Cubs are out. And it's heartbreaking for me because I love the starting rotation. I've been very positive about that. Love the coach. Been positive about that shift too. I think the offensive pieces on the younger side here can grow into a fantastic nucleus for a Cubs team that now has Isaac Paredes to potentially build around. Pete Crow Armstrong, I have my eye on as a potent piece of the future, potentially with his speed and ability to hit some extra base hits quite naturally, I would say. But your Seiya Suzuki's, the exciting National League rookie candidate Michael Busch, the slugger Ian Happ, Nico Horner, the great contact guy. These guys are done. They're out. They're no longer candidates for postseason contention. And with a team that just on paper looked stable enough in my mind, and I've talked all year about why I feel that way, I'm just disappointed in them, man. And as one of the teams that just fell out of the race today, they deserve to be this low. How do you feel? How wrong was I? Kick some dirt on my prediction, baby, because it's come to pass away right here in front of our very eyes on our show.
Yeah, it definitely did not go the way that Cubs fans thought it would this year. There was a very vocal contingent that was upset that the Cubs didn't do more in the offseason to try and address some of the issues that we saw, some of the lack of depth hitting. Throwing guys like Pete Crow Armstrong, who's a young player who needs playing time, but it's his first year in the bigs full time, and it's just not going to help push you on a playoff run. And that's what the Cubs wanted this year. And rather than going for that depth, they chose to not and called up these younger players who did make an impact. And you're right, Warren, I agree. Some of these players will be good for a long time. It just didn't all stitch together right now, and I think Bellinger at this point can we say he's like as streaky as Bryce Harper? Like, he has the peaks, but he's not a guy you can build your whole team around.
Not anymore.
The Phillies couldn't do that with Harper. They had to bring in a ton of other power guys. So, I think that's pretty clear to the Cubs now. Pretty disappointing that this is the way the year ends. I can think back on pitching situations or certain decisions to not call up players. There's 1,000 things you can nitpick to the Cubs getting this close. At the end of it, though, Warren, they did finish second in the NL Central. It was a very competitive NL Central, and even though you're probably still disappointed with how things shook out, I think it was actually the second most competitive division in baseball by record. And for the Cubs to finish second of that, we'll see how they finish at the end of the year, but a full step above the Reds and the Pirates, who are pretty competitive at times this year. They salvaged a pretty good part of this year. But yeah, I think you're right to have them down here because it hurts. It also stings to lose to kind of a floundering Oakland team and hand the division title to your opponent that won it last year. That wasn't supposed to. So I think you're right, Warren. It's rough day and week for the Cubs.
Yeah, man, Oakland's been one of the spoilers we predicted could arise here in the last 8 days. Are we shocked? Not super duper, if I'm being honest. We'll talk on Oakland later more. But yeah, the Cubs found themselves at long last on the outside looking in for that playoff race. And I couldn't help but bring up some comparison there. 2.5 WAR for, I know I didn't think I'd lean on WAR a lot today, but I will. 2.5 WAR for Cody Bellinger, 4.5 for Harper. So a pretty clear sign that unlike Harper, who can still ride his streakiness to provide some hot tendencies, Cody might not be the nucleus of a team anymore like he was treated like when we were waiting for him to get signed this past offseason. Like you, for all the different ways I said other solutions for other teams like a Kyle Gibson or a Lance Lynn were not the answer. Cody has proven he's not the answer either. And that leaves Chicago with a couple question marks on who's next to fill some voids. I would let Pete Crow Armstrong ride out that center field and start developing. Unless there's an obvious free agent or trade choice that Chicago stumbles upon to be excited about. And I'd be excited about, Isaac Paredes as a piece in the future. He didn't really get to settle into the lineup here leading into the end of the season. He will be better for this squad next year. It's just who else can you put around them? And some of the pieces like Nico Horner, perhaps, or Ian Happ, are they the right ones to have on this team who's trying to take steps forward? Dansby Swanson too, right? Another one who's been streaky for years at a time, it would seem. I would hope he can continue, to be a shortstop of any team's future, but maybe not the right fit for Chicago. Question marks are still burgeoning. Perhaps their rotation is a little bit more stable, at least as the years go on. They did have all-star Shota Imanaga in their camp this year. They do have plenty of potent arms to build on around future years. So Chicago will return to our consideration next season, you would think, but so will a lot of the teams in
really
Central.
Really quick to close on Chicago. Do you think they would have had the same or a worse record if they hadn't gotten Craig Counsell this year?
Ooh, fun. Well, they were pushing for a playoff place last season too, right up to the 11th hour. It was almost a wash to have Craig Counsell on this team at the end of the day. So had he been picked up, would it have been better or worse? You have to think Milwaukee may have been even better. Question mark. I'd say they'd be worse. I'm going to say they would have been worse. That's my personal take. If you have one to weigh in on. Yeah. I don't really have the only why I can justify that with is that I feel like the Chicago team needed a coach or manager like Craig Counsell to be held together when they were up against the ropes several times throughout the season and continued to try to punch back into these races. I think a Counsell helps with that, whereas maybe a lesser manager doesn't. And that's where I stand. Sorry. I tried to pass you the buck, and then I kept talking.
No, I agree. I think I think there were a lot of decisions this year I saw Counsell handle better than some other managers in the league, and I still think he has that edge, even if they don't make the postseason like he has with the Brewers so much. So yeah, I think this is the difference between like the Cubs finishing the year second, their division, and like fourth. Because the division is pretty close. It comes down to those few games, and I think if you take that going forward. And like you were saying, if the Cubs can if they choose to keep Belly and get someone else who can be that guy, then that could be a huge step. It can make a pretty quick and easy turnaround.
Yep. Yeah, there's plenty of hope for that, especially with pitching being a strong, youthful suit for them, I would say. Nobody's looking too long in the tooth there, with the exception of maybe Jameson Tylon, but he's still carrying himself well on the mound, so I don't have him on my, liability radar right at the moment. But Chicago needs to find the liability somewhere because they're out of the race again. Tough one to see it for the culture, but the Cubs are out, and we will let them lie. Let's see who you've picked as our next saddest team in the league. We're at number 26, guys.
Yeah, no surprise here. We'll just get out of the way. They have more games back than they do wins. It's the Chicago White Sox. And Warren, all I have to say is they have to get the record. There's 2 weeks left. They're 4 games away. They're on a winning streak right now. They've won 5 games in the last 2 weeks. Warren, they need to get the record. That's all I'm rooting for. I don't want to see them suffer. I no bad will or anything like that. They can get to 121 and then win every other game. They just got to get the record.
Yep. Hey, spoken like a true Mets fan who wants that off their shoulders. I respect that. I'm trying to avoid my own record that we'll talk on later for my franchise. Most definitely. So I get wanting to get like nefariously negative statistics out of my clubhouse. I'm rooting for you, and I think you're going to be okay. Chicago White Sox have been so abysmal culturally from beginning to end that it's just it. You give them a little bit of a round of applause, as I just did, for a 5-9 week. That's what we call a celebration for them. Okay, after dropping your typical series to Baltimore, dropping a typical series to Boston, getting swept by the Guardians, and surprisingly beating the Oakland Athletics 2 out of 3. They have started out with a split against the Angels, 1-1. Their third game coming up later today. It's just a surprisingly winning week for a team that hasn't had the opportunity to say that hardly at all this year. Just disastrous, and maybe historically so. 5 wins or 5 losses away. Excuse me. You have to expect it to happen. You look at the
From being
pitching,
the
man.
worst team ever. So
Can you believe? I hear you.
Worst team ever.
It's shocking that they've still allowed. Listen to this. They still have allowed, believe it or not, I believe the 4th fewest hits, if I'm not mistaken, in the league.
Wow.
Isn't that weird?
That's
How
nuts.
can they?
I mean, Eric Crochet's still been dealing, at least.
Right. There's definitely at least that bright spot. This isn't even a team with like, they have the 24th worst defense proficiency, I suppose. I don't know, man. It's been a disaster from the word go. Did they walk into the season expecting no way out? Because that's the way they played. Like, there was no competitive feeling whatsoever. And around every statistic you look at, apart from the one I just gave you where they allowed the 4th fewest hits, there's just nothing to be excited about. Are you seeing something I'm not? Like, what is there to build on?
No, man, there's really not much. And the word is the owner wants to cut payroll even more going into next year.
Jesus.
And I think this is one of the teams affected by the broadcasting issues, but that's just an excuse. Like, cutting payroll from what you're already at, like, it's so opposite what you see, like the Royals turn around in a year, Warren. And it's not like they're like, you could argue they're a World Series contender, but they just went from worst to playoff team. That's all.
Right.
That's all that that's all as fans we ask for. Just try. And you're right, going into this year, we didn't see that effort from the White Sox, and just hearing that we might not again going into next year, it's very disappointing. It's hard to find bright spots.
Can you imagine being the broadcast team or the support staff paid to basically put this product out or talk about it? Like, yeah, imagine every day going into work and talking about how futile your organization is from the time they hit the field to the time the lights are shut off after the game. It is a tough career path in my mind. I strive for excellence in everything I do. To be anywhere associated with the Chicago White Sox right now feels like a one-way ticket to depression town for me. So I have to imagine everybody in the south side of Chicago is kind of leveraging on the same mood. And another question, just like the Guards, or not Guards, but the Giants, plus or minus 5 years will do for this team before they even pretend to have a shot at the American League Central division again.
I mean, they were a playoff team 5 years ago, a good one.
There you go.
And that is where it stems from. You could always draw back playoff runs and those types of teams in each team's history and see where it kind of derailed. If hindsight's 2020, where it's easy for us to look back, see that 2019 into the 2020 White Sox team didn't have quite enough to kick it in the postseason, lost their manager, hired Tommy Lasorda, and everything just started spiraling out of control year after year before all of those stars who are now gone. So I'll give them 5 years, Warren. I think they can turn it around in 5 years. And the fact that they've been that close before makes me think that they can. But I don't know. I mean, they fired their manager this year and things are kind of the same. So
yeah, but it takes a while to enact change, right?
Sure.
From that level of the organization. So I wouldn't blame, new manager per se. I would think that your optimism there, very kind, very sweet. We'll see if there's any faster rebounding. At least this seems like an organization that's capable of sucking up future assets, right? Like, they're not inept on such a cosmic level They just were this year, we'll say. Just didn't have much to play for and much to rally around, and no surprises in their chamber to fire off. So, all right, Chicago, good luck avoiding history, but not really. Enjoy having it is the preference, really. Up next, I'm going to stab at a team. It's tough for me to know which one I think is more disappointing at this moment, but they both come from the American League East between my two candidates. I think I have to land one last time on another recently eliminated team that was going so hot and even had the American League, even had the All-Star Game MVP. Yep. One last time, let me go ahead and call out the Boston Red Sox, who are officially eliminated from playoff contention, or at least on the cusp of it. It's close, at least according to Fangraphs plays baseball odds. They're slightly better off than those Rays, but the Rays beat them yesterday. Rays still have a chance of playoffs. It's stupid. It's crazy. It's cosmic. Can't wait to talk about them. But I'm putting Boston first because of expectations. Jarren Duran has been a house of fire for the majority of the year, and everybody's just now cooling off around him, and they're falling just short and shy of a playoff opportunity. As you predicted, Dan, it just wasn't quite enough, and they're 75-75, sitting at 500 at this moment, and only 4 runs positive in differential. It's just, gosh, they were so close to making a cool story happen, and it didn't. And you have to just be a little disappointed. That's why they're a little bit lower than some of the other trash time teams we can talk about. Their record was just abysmal at 5-8 this week, getting swept by the Mets in what was obviously a dagger for their season, because you have to expect them to beat the White Sox as they did 2 out of 3. They did get to beat Baltimore 2 out of 3 too, a team that, again, we'll talk on their soft landing here shortly. And then the Yankees took 3 of 4 from them in another friendly reminder of how far they have to go. And now the Rays are making more pain for them here, taking game 1 of their series, game 2 later today. It's just a bummer, I would say, for how close Boston was to being a playoff team this year. We talked often about how their pitching overachieved. They're, even in this stage of the season, only now starting to fall off, if I'm being honest. We see them cool down to a 4.16 ERA to be more in the middle of the rankings at this point. But man, were they on fire in the first half. Just kind of fell off after the second half. I set the table enough. What's your thought on Boston?
You nailed it there, Warren. I mean, they had some pretty hefty injuries to the position players at the start of the year, and the pitching staff held up through it. I was not a believer at all, and they managed to pretty much keep up that pace until the All-Star break. And I think it's worth noting the amount of pitchers that they have lost since then. If I could rattle off a few for you, Warren, just some reminders that currently on their injured list is Lucas Giolito, Brian Mata, Chris Murphy, James Paxton, Garrett Whitlock, Isaiah Campbell, Liam Hendricks, Lucas Sims, and Luis Garcia. Those are 5 starters and 5 bullpen arms, including your primary closer, that they lost. That kind of coincided. Tanner, I think, just came back. Warren, too. He's been out for the last month as well. So their pitching very much was depleted due to injury. And if you combine that with the injuries to position players at the start of the year, then you could still make the argument that this is the playoff team that, similar to the Braves, was just really spoiled by injuries at kind of the worst kind of times. Because when they were at full strength, this team was something to watch, Warren. I know you've seen a number of their games. Keep it very competitive. And something that stood out to me this last series against the Yankees, I don't know if you saw any of it, but fiery, very fiery. Maybe an intentional hit towards Aaron Judge, some retaliation from the other side, and just really fiery. Good to see that rivalry kind of get up into it again. And even if they're not a playoff team, now with the Orioles just being as good as they are, the Red Sox and the Yankees fill out the rest of that division, probably make it as competitive as it's been in a really long time. So disappointing for Boston for sure, but positive lights.
Excellent note that really it was pitching injuries that could very well have derailed what was otherwise a shockingly promising campaign because, yeah, they were in the top 3 for the majority of the year and suddenly find themselves in the back third, right, of ERA. And that can all be pointed towards these awful injuries because the offense was practically Brewer like, the Brewers being the best offense in the league, guys. Let that sink in until later in our conversation. But yeah, we look at the hitting statistics and rankings for this Boston squad, and they find themselves 5th in hits. They find themselves 10th in runs. They find themselves in the top 10 in doubles, triples, and home runs, RBI. They are at 10. Like, 8th in stolen bases. This is a team that was using a lot of different tools offensively to stay afloat. And you got to give them credit for that. And it's great that they have a little bit of backbone and a little bit of chippiness on their shoulder. You got to look at Boston to be a very interesting candidate next year to maybe surprise several playoff hopefuls, just because they almost did this year. And yeah, winning Boston Red Sox baseball is on its way back to Beantown, you'd have to imagine. It's just a matter of how many teams around them are going to be just as staunch, because you're right. That is a loaded division. That division, like if the Rays could almost back their way into the playoffs this year, despite looking the entire time like a team consciously aware of being a step behind, that division is disgusting. Yikes-tastic. So I'm just bummed for Boston that they couldn't pull off the big storyline that was brewing all year for them. And that's why they have to fall this low. But Dan, who you got, dude, for number
I
20?
never believed in you, Boston.
No. Spoken like a true New Yorker. You're not.
Let's do another team, or another team that we lost faith in. Let's do the Blue Jays.
Yeah.
They deserve to be down here.
Amen. Especially after a couple of weeks sitting at number 11. They were red hot the last 2 weeks. Vladdy. Hey, who doesn't want Vladdy Guerrero at the nucleus of their team? Imagine him in your cleanup spot. Big smiles, especially after the last couple of weeks. But then they stopped fighting with such potency. They let themselves slow down a tad. They sit right now at 5-7 since my last conversation with Dan the Man. 72 and 79 being the record, a negative 53 run differential, despite the bat that is Guerrero. They got a 2-game series sweep at the hands of the Phillies. They dropped 2 of 3 to Atlanta, 2 of 3 to the Mets. You're welcome. They swept St. Louis to effectively put them in the ground. More on them shortly, I'm sure. And then even failed to beat the Rangers in their first attempt yesterday. This is a team now at this point waving that white flag, looking around and wondering, is this truly who will be next year? Dan, do you think it is?
Oof, man, it's this team didn't do any of the things we thought they would do, Warren. I think we were down on them at the start of the year, but I think we agree that it would be a situation of like, okay, you go all in, you buy, you keep this core, you go aggressive, and you compete, or you sell. They kind of did a little of both. Like they didn't go all in one way or the other, which I feel like is the worst thing they could have done, because now you are bringing a lot of these players into another year. You're taking Vladdy into his last year of eligibility. Dude's hitting 322 right now. Nobody else on the team is hitting over 220. I think Spencer Horwitz is hitting 272 in limited plate appearances, and that's it. So it's only Guerrero. And yeah, I think that could be soul crushing to the rest of an organization, because it's I would even compare it to it like an Ohtani situation in Los Angeles, where you have good players around him who were doing well, but as soon as he left, it's like the bottom fell out. And that could very much be the situation that'll happen here in Toronto. And if they're not going to get rid of Vladdy, like it sounds like they're not going to, then they need to act like he's going to be re-signed, and they can't bring back this same roster next year, Ward. Because if they bring back the same roster for the most part, and it's Vladdy's last year, I don't know what incentive he's going to have to resign, because you can't expect better results in this division that we just talked about is going to be super competitive. And this team is easily the worst in as of now, and probably looking into next year too. I mean, they need to make some big moves to make some changes, because, you've already committed to not going in on the rebuild earlier. You could start now. It's going to be too late no matter what. So it feels like they're just going to kick the can down the road one more year.
Well, can you, and I know this is a big bullet to put in my chamber, point the gun at your head and go, what are you going to do, Dan? What's the big change that you think this team needs first? And I know you've talked about getting rid of a general manager and having a new head at the helm. I think that is something I would do if we're really going to play insanity and do this again with the Guerrero and Bichette. But yeah, I mean, I also wanted to ask you what happens if Matt Chapman had remained with this team after he was obviously the glue that kept the Giants in the race for the majority of this year. Maybe he could have been the guy to keep Toronto in this race. But the question I have more urgently is, apart from a new general manager, who or what is the first big change you would make? Can you isolate something? I know you're not an AL guy, but you pick this team to be able to make it back to the postseason. So you have to have something circled as an ulcer. We hinted last week it could be Bo Bichette. I don't know how true you feel that is a week later. I'm just seeing if you feel like you can take a stab at one change that you'd like to see to make this team a playoff contender next year, despite it all.
So they called up a young player, Addison Barger, who's been their third baseman. He's been okay. Nothing amazing so far, and he's shown some power, but has been kind of limited on batting average.
Okay.
I could see them bringing in a really good, strong second baseman, of which we've talked about. There's going to be some available, and solidifying that infield a little bit, improving that defense. And we've seen in other teams like the Reds and even the Royals, how much of a confidence booster that can be and how much that can lead to runs and things like that. So I guess I'm trying to say is like pick one area to just like master and let that be your thing, you know, because if I look at the Blue Jays right now, they don't excel in any one particular area. You know, they have Vladdy doing all his star stuff, but outside of that, you can't say that they're a power team. I wouldn't say they're a well-rounded hitting team. They're not a good defensive team. They're okay on the pitching side of things, but that's not, I would say, the identity of their team. Sorry, Warren, I'm dancing around your question, but that's going to be my answer. If you have to do something, bring in a legit second baseman or someone to solidify your infield and let that be your strength. The good, strong defensive baseball, and that's going to win you more games, you know, and hopefully provide some confidence.
No, I love the stab at it. This was a top 10 team defensively in efficiency this year. I look at an Ernie Clement I'm noticing on their roster who honestly did a lot for them this year. Taking a look at numbers, he did get to play 128 games, 3.6 WAR contributed. Maybe he could be a piece that's burgeoning into someone to focus on for the future. Spencer Horowitz, we already talked about, is already trying to be treated that way. Is he enough is the question. So a good stab, my friend. We've talked, again, a different general manager, maybe even a Bo Bichette trade. Like those could be the things that are on the horizon from my perspective. But this is a team that needs to do something bold if they're bringing the majority of the pig back, right? To try to feast on next year. You got to do something bold to accent that. So it's not just the same exact regurgitation. I think a general manager change could be the most likely, or a Bo Bichette trade could be the biggest blockbuster. That's it for me as far as a team I called done a few weeks ago. Toronto did not achieve Dan's expectations. I didn't have them in my playoff bracket, so I'm patting myself on the back in spirit. I'm also advancing us into the next option. And Dan, it's only fair. You called out the team that I said was done a few weeks ago. I'm going to call out the team that you said was done months ago, because even though they're still in a position to make the playoffs at this moment, at 5-8, the Arizona Diamondbacks are not doing themselves any favors, guys. What the heck? I thought you wanted to win baseball games. You're not looking like it at this stage of the season. You're not supposed to be going in for a soft landing if you haven't done enough to earn the playoff opportunity immediately, right? Like Baltimore can breathe. You cannot, Arizona. That's the thing I'm building up here. You drop 2 of 3 to the Giants. Whoops. You beat the Giants 2 of 3.
Yeah.
Excuse me. That's appropriate. But you dropped 2 of 3 to Houston. No thanks. Didn't want that. You split with Texas. You know, of course, in a 2-game set, somebody gets punchy usually. You lose a set to Milwaukee. certainly doesn't help you either. And now you've lost 2 of 3 to the Rockies. What's wrong with you, Arizona? Don't you want this? Haven't you been playing suddenly like the contender you were last year and have been suddenly in the second half? Don't you want to prove you're not done, Arizona? Are they still done, Dan? Are they going to find their way out of the playoff bracket? It's the 11th hour.
It hasn't looked good, dude. It has not looked
Holy
good
God.
Since Marte came back. It's been a little bit better, but it's so tight. And at this point, we're just talking about that last few matchups at the end of the season, right? MLB's really good about trying to design those last 2 series to try and be impactful onto a potential wild card. And with the Diamondbacks having a 3-game set against the Giants and then 3 games against the Padres, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility they lose 4 of those 6 games. And depending on the series that the Braves have going forward, like, you could see them swept out of the postseason this final week. So I still don't see them as being safe, Warren. I think they're on the precipice. And even making it in, they would have a lot to worry about for any postseason matchup.
Well, offensively is what they've been hanging their hat on. We've said it a lot this year that their pitching staff has been largely invisible. At least it feels that way. There's not been a superlative name in my mind. Overall, I will say that at a 27th in the league in ERA, not what you wanted to be as the team running it back, right, for the National League pennant.
Right.
That's not what they were built to be when the season started. So you have to look at pitching as a huge pitfall to their true validity as a contender for sure. You look at Arizona's defense too. They're down at the 29th position in defensive efficiency, despite committing the lowest number of errors and the 6th most double plays. As a defense, they still have the worst efficiency. Go figure, right? All the while, all I'm doing is pointing out how there's just inconsistency outside of the offense, which is first in runs, second in hits, fourth in home runs, first in RBI. Talk about one of the best offenses in the league, most definitely. And it's been necessary for that to happen, for them to buoy what's been just an abysmal defensive and pitching effort from the word go this year. Proof that offense can push a team this deep, but it is a glass cannon in a way, right? Truthfully.
Yeah, it's weird, Warren, because Zach Gallen has been good, not as great as he's been in years past, but the real surprising thing has been Jordan Montgomery this year.
Yeah.
After his struggles, he was moved into the bullpen where he did slightly better. But injuries kind of forced the Diamondbacks to put him back into the rotation. And he struggled again. Like, he has not found it in the same way that Blake Snell and some of these other pitchers have. Always could be disastrous for him after he, who knows where he'll end up after the season, or if he's going to be another, what was that? Alex Manoah 2.0 or something. I hate to say that, but it's not looking good for Montgomery.
Oh gosh. Yeah, it doesn't look good for Montgomery. We hinted last week how, he feels screwed by by Scott Boras, right? But at the same time, he hasn't done anything with a +6 ERA to justify being more cared for, more compensated next year. This could be a very interesting offseason for Jordan Montgomery and Arizona as a whole. They need to figure out some of their pitching challenges, most definitely. And their defense should get tightened up before they can return to playoff consideration next year. You can't just be a glass cannon. You can't just be an offensive force, though Milwaukee would argue with that. We'll talk more on that later. But Arizona, shape up or ship out, man. Are you going to drop this opportunity to an Atlanta Braves team that's not exactly doing much to earn it? That would sure be a bummer for the defending National League champions. Dano. Both the teams we listed as done at some point earlier in the season have been done today. Who's next to take a position in our vibe check? We sit at number 22.
Yeah, next up, let's knock out the Minnesota Twins.
Yo, yes, I'm chasing these Twins in more ways than one, you guys. You saw my hashtag there. I can explain shortly, but what are you doing, Minnesota? Yeah. They're like the Diamondbacks of the American League. Tell us about it, Dan.
Dude, they're choking it all away. They went from almost being right there to contend for the division title to getting caught by the Royals and now barely hanging on to this third wild card spot, which, I mean, a few weeks ago it was Boston about 4 games out and Seattle a little bit further. And now Detroit and Seattle have closed that all the way up to 1.5 and 3 games respectively.
Remarkable.
We have seen, yeah, man. And it's what's sad to see is I was updating the numbers, Warren, and the Twins' run differential drop was huge over these last 2 weeks. It's the offense. And when you go to look at the numbers, nobody stands out, Warren, over the last, you want to talk 14 days, you want to talk 30 days. Like, I see good performances from guys like Pablo Lopez, Bailey Ober on the pitching side of things, but the offense has just sputtered. And they are like, their engine is dead and they are just rolling towards the finish line. And there are teams coming full speed behind them. And I don't know, Warren, I would have been totally confident that this is going to be a playoff team, but part of the reason we have them down this low is they are another team that's looking at possibly losing their seeds on the last week of the season, which would just be crushing.
No, I thank Minnesota for this week of ineptitude for sure, because it's keeping my my Seattle Mariners wild card hopes alive.
Yes.
And it's Minnesota, we didn't even think about going into this season to retain their championship, and this choke job is kind of showing why. It is kind of embarrassing when you look as good as you did so much of the season and had so many teams' numbers, and now you are really letting it go at the end of the year. This is their second grossly losing show in a row for us. It's hard to have faith that they're going to figure it out for the last couple of series in the season for sure. Let's kind of relay what their path is and think, can they really beat these teams at this stage, especially with certain teams playing the spoiler role like you predicted they'd be, man? I'm looking at the Twins and thinking, can they beat Boston? Can they beat Miami? Can they beat a Baltimore team that's going in for that soft landing? And I have to say they probably could, man. I'm not going to lie. I can see them having just enough of a week to back that butt into the 6th spot. I'm just being honest. I do think they'll figure it out just enough. Not that I'm super happy about it, but they will not be the team that wins another first round series, I would predict, right? Sure. This doesn't seem like the team who's going to have the offensive firepower to get by any of the candidates who might face them in round 1.
So one stat at you with that, Warren, because you like you said, it's Boston, Miami, and Baltimore.
Sure.
That they're closing the regular season with. So I will say that their record as of now against teams with records over 500 is 36-51. So almost a 1-2 record in those types of series. And 2 of the 3 remaining teams are over 500. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to lose, but just the numbers point in a different direction.
Well, Boston's at 500, this cup of tea, if I'm being honest. And so, yeah, I hear you. I'm focused on Minnesota from a Seattle standpoint because all of a sudden their position in the playoffs is easily the most fragile, though the other path would take us, out of over Houston. But they do own the wild card on Seattle. They also own the record for the most strikeouts in all of baseball history with last year's 1,654, if I'm not mistaken. Now, we Mariners are 51 strikeouts away from that.
51?
Yep.
With 2 weeks left?
I will drive home our own attempt to avoid our own horrible statistic getting put on our shoulders when we talk about Seattle shortly. But the point is, we're chasing Minnesota. I'm hoping them, I suppose, in this stage to fail so that we can succeed. But I just don't look at this as a list of teams that will stop them. However, anything can happen. Baseball is beautiful for that reason. Miami can decide to be a spoiler. And goodness knows, Boston and let's see. Sorry, I already navigated away. Already slipping on the brain whom they're facing after. Boston, Baltimore, right?
And Miami, yeah.
Yeah, I could see Boston and Baltimore doing what they need to do right, to allow Minnesota to live, because Baltimore has been so hit or miss, and we'll talk on that very shortly, I'm sure. As a matter of fact, Dan, I wonder if that'll be your next choice or even mine. Let's scroll up. Let's pick a new victim, because Minnesota, we're coming for you. Will you please remain feudal? I doubt it, but we'll hope so. Yeah, Dan, I hinted. Let's do it. It's my turn to throw Baltimore under the bus pretty hard, and I'm curious what you feel about this, because at number 21, they belong here. They've had such a losing week, but I feel like vehemently, I really am convinced this is so very much on purpose. They did go 5-8, matching the Twins record this week, I believe. And are 84-67 overall. They have no danger of falling out of the playoffs. I feel like they're coming in for a soft landing. I keep alluding to this idea. Remember that old like computer game where there was like you were controlling like a satellite that was coming in for a landing on the worst like 6-bit version of the moon?
Yeah.
You had to shoot like the terrain until it was flat enough, and then you had to use your jets to come in for just the softest little landing. Yeah. I feel like that's Baltimore this season. I feel like they are turning off the jets and allowing themselves to lose a plenty to cushion the landing, to blow everybody away in the postseason with their energy, their youthful, contact-oriented baseball. I don't think they're as feudal as the record suggests, but they belong here because it's been a couple of weeks, right, of coming in for this soft landing. So you, especially Dan, who love putting them this low in the countdown, could argue that maybe they're just this mediocre at this point, but you're going to need to convince me for sure. Series losses to the Rays, the Red Sox, and Detroit are not enough, even with them losing to the Giants in their first game of that series last night, for me to believe that this is truly a bad Baltimore team. I think they're doing it on purpose. Convince me otherwise, Dan.
Wow. Well, I'll do the first thing that can convince you otherwise is they DFA'd Craig Kimbrell today, which doesn't sound like a team that wants to lose to me. Or that's it sounds like they are hemorrhaging runs out of the back of the bullpen and they don't know what to do about it.
What?
Yeah.
They DFA'd Craig Kimbrell.
They did. And now Dominguez is continuing to be the closer and not locking it down. It gets worse, Warren. I got numbers here for you. Their offense has been consistently getting worse month by month. In June, they averaged 5.62 runs per game. So good. In July, that dropped to a little over 4. Continued to drop in August, and as of now, it is 3.77. So they've dropped a full 2 runs per game. Astonishing rate. And since July 7th, they have a 27-34 record. Below 500. So these are multiple signs to me, Warren, that's pointing towards a not just a slumping offense, an offense that's disappearing. I don't even know how else to say it. I mean, Jackson Holliday has kind of gone from his resurgence when he got called back up and being a starter to really more of just a relegated bench role as of now.
Yeah.
And even traditional like stalwarts like Santander and Henderson have dropped off a cliff recently. Like I'm just looking at their rankings, batting statistics in the past 7 days, Warren. No one is in the top 127. And that's Gunnar Henderson. And then is everybody else. So that shows you how much they've been struggling at the plate recently. And Warren, this sounds, and we saw them in first place the last time we spoke, to now 4 games back of the wild card. They're a playoff team, but are they a first round bounce? Because that's what I see looking at all of these things. I hope it's not true, and I know you're right. We saw what they could do last year, but I'm a little worried.
What's happening? Dan, you
convince you.
Look at you go.
Good.
Look at you go. Great success. Could Baltimore fly the coop from the playoff race after all in just the first round against a team like the Kansas City Royals, like the Minnesota Twins, like the Seattle Mariners, like the Houston Astros, like. Could it happen? And it could be, which would be amazing in that, gosh, did this Baltimore team not look like the most stable thing in American League Baseball? right up until Cleveland and New York started, scraping it away from them. But man, you've done it, man. You convinced me this could be the worst trend possible for any team looking to march their way through a postseason bracket. This could be the choke job that everyone's talking about going to the next season. But let's go with the worst case scenario. If Baltimore's truly lost it, maybe their youth has made it so that they're out of answers, right, for the adjustments that more veteran teams have made against them. Maybe they're running out of energy. We see a lot of inexperienced teams, which comparably this Baltimore squad certainly is. They're practically half made up of compelling rookies, right? Maybe they've just run out of the energy and the steam and the stamina that teams undoubtedly need to have some in the tank for, like I was suggesting they were trying to save. But the truth is, all the stats say that they have just flown the coop, screwed the pooch, fallen asleep at the wheel. All of the other euphemisms that suggest that Baltimore may not be nearly as safe to find themselves in the second round, one way or another, regardless of seeding. Scary to be a Baltimore fan suddenly. Good on you, Dan. I'm proud of myself for putting them in the bottom third now this year or this week. But it was obvious, man. They've just been trending so lazily downward and now not so lazily. So everybody's eyes should be on Baltimore. They were the most likely chosen ones to topple Darth Vader in the form of New York, if you ask me. And now the chosen ones have their right hand cut off and they've lost their lightsaber down into the chute. You know what I mean? This is a reference to episode 5, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
The Yankees are their daddies right now. All right. Can it change? We'll find
impossible.
out. No! I hate Luke. All right. Moving on. Han Solo all the way for the record. Let's get ourselves into the last number of the 20s. 21, I believe, is the magical number at this stage. Nope, 20 it is. 20. Dan, it's your choice, though. And guys, we're out of teams with bad records this week. Baltimore was the last. Everybody else is now mediocre to good. So let's see what Dan chooses as the first domino in this stage of our countdown.
Thank you, Warren. And this one's, I think it's actually a little bit higher than where we've had it. And I'm going to say it's because of just the players playing. Warren, it's the Oakland Athletics, and it's because we're at a point in the season. They called up Lawrence Butler. They're allowing other guys to play, and they're playing, and they're doing what we said. They're beating teams they shouldn't. They're causing chaos, and we love it.
Yep, little chaos ball for sure. Oakland definitely one of the teams playing it well. They did go 500. Now just a breath over that, if I'm not mistaken, as they did topple the Cubs earlier today to win that series. They're 9-8. Hey. They split a series with my Seattle Mariners to frustrate us, 2-2. They lost 2 of 3 to those Tigers. Tigers, a story to talk about later today. Then Houston actually lost 2 of 3 to this team too. Thank you, Oakland. Way to play spoiler for a second. Before they allowed themselves to lose a series to the White Sox. Talk about a team that's playing motivated as they wish. You know what I mean? Not every time, but motivated to win and capable of it when the ball and bat are making good contact. This is an offense better than it has appeared all year. It's funny because they go on winning streaks almost at whim. They just ride the upward momentum and then cool off the jets and slow down, take some losses, and then they'll just warm up for a while again. And it's so funny how they go stop and go, stop and go. It's clearly a symptom of a team that could be better than they're choosing to be. They're not choosing to be the competitive team that these Oakland Athletics actually have in the back tank of their organization. Is that offensive, by the way, to an Oakland fan base that deserved maybe one more Cinderella run? Or, as we've talked about, pitching really wasn't strong enough to buoy what was an overachieving lineup. Which storyline's more likely? We didn't want to win, or we didn't have the pitching capable of uplifting such an interestingly hot and cold offense.
It's hard to say like win, especially when you look at that division. But I think especially seeing where they're at now, 67 wins they're at now, Yeah, if they had been a little bit more aggressive, made some better decisions at the start of the year, and gotten some more players, even if it's one or two of those pitcher types, I could see them being a lot more competitive right now, right, Warren? And you're
Yeah.
right. It would to give that to that fan base the last year in Oakland would have been huge. I think ultimately, honestly, it's a petty thing. I think it's we could buy some players and we could be competitive and we can give one last hurrah to the city of Oakland, right? They could have done that, but the decision was made like, no, screw this city, screw you guys. We're not going above and beyond. We're going to save as much money as possible, and then we'll start to spend next year or maybe even in 3 years. And that's the way I see it, as a chance to do something, and they just didn't.
Doesn't that just seem so poopy?
Yeah,
the
man,
only thing I can say.
Ownership in this league, dude, like the fact, like them, Chicago, like the things that these owners get away doing, where meanwhile you have, I just keep bringing it up, Kansas City, like, because I saw this thing that Chris Young went to the owner in Kansas City and asked for an increase in payroll for them to sign free agents. He showed them the numbers. Can we get Bobby Witt on this extension? This is what he's going to be worth. We will make the money back. And the owner, who hasn't spent that type of money in 10 years, he did it. He said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And it immediately worked. And sure, it doesn't always immediately work, but you're supposed to try, And this is a team that didn't try, and look how well they're doing, right? Like, it makes you think, if they did, what could they have been? So yeah, it's disappointing. Hate the ownership there. It's going to be weird to see him in Sacramento. Did you hear they're not even committing to Sacramento, Warren? Like, they left it open to the point that and this actually feeds into your point a little bit, if Oakland does, I guess they'll be the Athletics next year. If the Athletics do make the postseason next year, they have it in their deal that they are not required to play games at their new diamond in Sacramento. So they could basically go wherever they want. I don't know what that means. If it means, like, if the Giants are out of it, they're going to go to Oracle and play there. Like, I don't know where they would go, but they're so uncommitted to the place they're going that they're saying we don't want to play playoff games there, which is like shitty before you even get into the city limits.
The word is uncommitted, right? The word is uncommitted. They're uncommitted to winning. They're uncommitted to the fan base that's been behind them since 1901. 123 years the Oakland Athletics have been a team. Uncommitted is like, people get fired from their everyday hamburger flipping jobs because they're uncommitted. Okay. That shouldn't be a word that is synonymous with one of the most storied franchises in sports. And it's demoralizing to know attitudes like that get paid way more money than I'll ever smell in my life. Because if there's anything I'm not when I'm doing something, it's uncommitted. It's offensive that that's the attitude that permeates this organization. Again, since 1901, an Oakland fan base has cheered on and stood by this organization through victories, losses, earthquakes, and the like. Uncommitted. Shame on you, Athletics. Shame on you. I live in the city you're trying to call home in 3 years. I don't give a second thought to you. I think about getting to see my Angels and my Mariners play. That's all I think about. I don't give a dang about athletic baseball because you don't give a dang about athletic baseball. And it's too bad because the players give more of a dang about athletic baseball right now. Shame on you. Shame that that's a word we use to describe any franchise in American sports. Shame on you for setting that example for sports fans who want to grow up to be anything related to something great. Shame. That's just a shame. I'm disappointed to have that run home to me, my friend. How dare they?
Yeah,
and that's
well said, Warren. That's true.
Let's leave them at that. Quit being a shame. You're a shame, Oakland Athletics. Athletics, you're a shame. I feel so bad for the people of Oakland. And it's so funny because I would love to watch a competitive Oakland baseball team, even against my Mariners. Why? Because competitive baseball is fun.
Yeah.
Duh. All right. Anyway, I don't need to do this much more. But thanks for that.
Last week's of baseball in Oakland, though. So tune in, catch a game.
Are they even committed to that? Is the thing.
Oh, they're gone. I know that they're gone. They can't play there next year. That they're for sure out of Oakland. Yes, but
Yeah, puke.
I was gonna say it'll be the last baseball game in Oakland. I mean, who knows if we can say that
Yeah.
if a new stadium is ever built, I can see them supporting another team. But I think Warren, you were the one that mentioned that like the Golden State Warriors kind of took over that area and kind of showed that you maybe you could support two teams in that area, but you could also have one kind of mega team. And I can see the Giants maybe being a little bit more firm of, okay, you guys left. This is ours now. This is all ours.
I've heard a lot of buzz about how the Giants could become like the next big market monster because of all of the other baseball teams in its market now being gone,
Yeah,
and it being it, for better or for worse. I mean, I can't imagine that their mecca of an organization, right, being run as negatively as it has been, will just turn the corner into being a Yankee or a Philadelphia type organization, as far as quality.
right.
But we already did our number on the Giants. Another disappointing team. Gosh, the Bay Area, man. They deserve better baseball, don't they? At least the guests do, the fans.
Yeah.
All right. This queasy stomach feeling I'm having needs to give way. I'm eyeing two teams to go next, one that's closer to your home, one that's closer to mine. I'm going to go ahead and actually target a team you would probably put next, just for fun, put some heat on you next. How about we'll do the Cardinals, because the Cardinals are missing the playoffs at number 19. They are 500 this week, 7-7. They went down swinging, man, taking a series against Milwaukee before losing 2 of 3 to Seattle, which, was probably their dagger. They then won a series against Cincinnati, trying to say, no, we can be okay. But before Toronto swept them and said, no, you really are done. And now that's where St. Louis sits. They did win the first 2 games of the series they're sharing with Pittsburgh right now, but it's pretty much a moot point. Fangraphs has their playoff likelihood at a 0.0%. So that's where they rest. And it's time to point out that they won't be making the bracket after all. You had them as the divisional winner. We made fun of my Cubs earlier for that reason, and now we get to do it to the Cardinals. How do you feel?
Yeah, I could just say like from a division that was like really surprising. Does it feel like this whole division kind of fell flat to end things? Like Milwaukee, like definitely holding on to it, but kind of just barely holding on to their division title, and the Reds and the Pirates falling off so much that the Cardinals end up third like they are now. It's all very strange. I won't get into all of the issues the Cardinals had this year. We talked a lot about.
I'm going to say, like, a week ago, we were like, Chicago Cubs were number 2. They were riding such momentum that maybe it was going to get more interesting. You're right. This last week is proving to be quite flat. One of the least interesting races now, literally in the moment. So, but it's the first one to fall, the first domino to fall, the first division to fall to a winner. And St. Louis missed it. And well, did you think it was always going to end up this way? I think just as recently as maybe 3 shows ago, you still thought this could be a playoff team.
Yeah.
Did you notice when the wheels fell off?
I don't think that there's anything that any in particular game or series that stood out to me. I mean, they are having a relatively good week until they got swept by Toronto, and that's one way to just knock the teeth right out of you.
True.
But it was just little underperformances all throughout the roster. I think that big trade they spun at the deadline did not work out the way that they wanted it to. They ended up letting Pham go for nothing, and Fedde has been okay, but he's probably their 4th best rotation piece, which is not what they were trading for. And just a whole bunch of disappointments that slowly have led them to here, where they're not technically mathematically eliminated, but I think we can all look at them and see that they're probably not going to be a playoff team. And I had to tell you, Warren, that Lance Lynn made what might well be his final start, at the very least in a Cardinals uniform at home, and possibly of his career. 6 innings pitched, 4 hits, only 1 earned run, 5 Ks, 2 walks, 92 pitches. He got the win. He ends his career on a high note. Well, I say ends his career. Well, who knows? We'll see. It very much feels like this might be the end of Lance Lynn.
Well, he wasn't the liability, that I feared he would be when the series or the season started, right?
They needed him more than they realized, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if a guy could get a paycheck that would keep him in it one more round, and whether that's a gamble worth taking, because there's always the thought of a pitcher, being around one more year than they should, which is how I feel Miles Mikolas actually is for this camp, or Steven Matz. Both are longer in the tooth than the rest of the family in that starting rotation. I don't know that for sure. I have to look at the ages. I
just had to rub you a little bit on Lynn Warren, but honestly though, his season was inconsistent. He was hurt a little bit. He had great games. He had not great games. All of that does not equal a starter that's going to get a contract. So it would probably be a bullpen role. And he's kind of said that he only wants to pitch for the Cardinals now. He doesn't want to bounce around the league again. He's done that. So unless the Cardinals offer him an opportunity like that, might be it for him. So
okay. Well, we'll look forward to how the off season progresses when we start seeing names call it a career. I think James Paxton actually did that just the other day, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to start seeing the swan songs start up and we'll look to see what notable names fall out of future baseball. I would like to say thanks, Lance Lynn, for being an entertainment side quest in our conversations. I had a lot of fun making you a scapegoat here or there. You honestly didn't have the worst year out there. I keep harping on Miles Mikolas, so there you go. Here's the thing is that I mentioned this last week, and it continues to be my overall impression. St. Louis is a team to me that's pressing. They're pressing their organization to find solutions and invest in players that may not be as stable and capable as they thought. They've been whiffing a little bit on some of the players they've been trying to develop, from a Jordan Walker to a Tanner Scott. No, Tanner Scott's a pitcher. Victor Scott, excuse me.
Victor Scott.
Yeah. Those are misses so far in their development that make me feel like maybe St. Louis is trying too hard to make certain pieces fit. They'll need to step back. And of course, with Arenado and, Goldschmidt being in the core of their future decision-making, this is a team that needs to take their temperature and really make some educated guesses on how they can get better next year. Do you see them losing or saying goodbye to an especially prolific piece over this next offseason to signal an even bigger turn into a new direction, Dano?
Even though he still has power, I think Goldschmidt as your first baseman probably has to go. He could be your DH if you want, but I think you're getting to the point where you want. I mean, the league's getting younger. Goldschmidt's going to be 38 years old. Yep. And Arenado is going to be the next one on that list, as he's already been slid over to third. So I think from an organizational standpoint, you've had some success with some of the younger guys like Mason Wynn. Like I say, keep it going. Stick somebody at first. Give yourself some offensive depth with Goldschmidt at DH until he's done with his contract. That's what I would do.
Well, big stuff. What you just said is the end of Paul Goldschmidt as the starting first baseman, who, when you and I, started talking baseball together, we all know Arenado and Goldschmidt were the best corners in baseball at the time.
The golden corners.
Yep. It would be an amazing thing to see that chapter end, yet it's being named as one of the things to look at closest. Buckle up, St. Louis fans. You might be ready for a paradigm shift, whether you're ready or not, actually, is really what I should say. But at least you're not Oakland. Okay, let's move on into the next option. Number 18 falls to you, my friend. I wonder if you know where I was thinking about going when I chose St. Louis instead. If so, man, we're killer. We'll find out. What do you think? Who's number 18?
Maybe we're on the same page here, Warren. I think I'm going to have to go with the Houston Astros.
Ooh, what the frick?
Threw you through a loop there, huh?
What the? What? That's so crazy. All right, Dan. I feel like you keep throwing Houston lower into these countdowns as a means to be nice to your co-host, and B, a means to try to have a hopeful undertone to the Seattle chapter of our conversation. But Dan, this is not where Houston belongs, even with the 500 record in my mind. I can't wait to see how you feel this way. They did get swept by Cincinnati, did the Astros, which was kind of a surprise. They did beat the Arizona Diamondbacks to make up for that, 2 out of 3, before dropping a series to Oakland to get back into the doghouse, before sweeping the Angels to get back out of the doghouse. And now they have worked their way into a series split thus far with the Padres, with the final game being later tonight. We need them to lose. Go ahead, Dan. How is this team worse than the team I'm going to say next? Because I'm telling you, they're not.
The vibes are bad because the record against winning teams has been very poor recently. That sweep, especially at the hands of Cincinnati, is kind of damning. That's the type of team that they should just be able to roll over. And this is all happening when the pitching is kind of, I would argue, peaking. The pitching staff is doing fantastically.
Right.
And I'm fairly certain that Framber Valdez is leading the entire league over the last 2 months with his innings pitch. So they have just absolutely surging on that side to the point where Verlander has been basically hopping in and out of the rotation, and they're just not wanting him to cause any more damage than he might. So they're not giving him anything extra. But you have like Spencer Arrighetti has settled in, like just really impressive on that side of things. However, Josh Hader has still blown several saves over the last few weeks. He almost blew the one against San Diego. He allowed the time run in that and almost gave it up. That's kind of been that issue we've talked about all year. It has not really resolved itself, especially with the rest of the injuries they've had to the bullpen, to guys like Javier and McCullers, and basically the rest of their depth is gone. But the thing for me, Warren, that kind of stands out is, like you said, 500 baseball is certainly not bad. I could see them falling back into the Mariners. I don't think they're going to lose it or anything like that. But we saw this team kind of I don't want to say walk, but like fall into the postseason last year. They did not perform as well as what we are used to in years past. So I think it would be realistic to kind of seeing the same results on the field, arguably a maybe worse team on the field than what we saw last year.
Yes.
I'm not super optimistic for them going forward. One of the things though, Warren, that really, I don't know if you saw that Padres game last night. There was an amazing moment in that one where Jose Altuve, Warren, who I have to remind you is the famous, don't take off my shirt, don't touch my jersey, Jose Altuve, never did anything wrong, Jose Altuve, you know what I'm talking about. Last night, he made contact. It was a tie game. I believe it was 3-3 late in the game against the Padres. He made contact with a ball that bounced on the infield and went towards third, and he never ran. He never left the box. So they caught it, and I believe they considered it I don't know if it was they considered it a hit. He thought, Jose Altuve thought it was a foul ball. So he told the umpire that I fouled it off. And I guess they looked at video review. They looked at it. They couldn't find conclusive evidence. So they didn't overturn the call. So Jose Altuve standing right outside the box with the umpire talking to the manager. Warren, he took off his shoe. He removed his sock. And he took 2 steps on the dirt to the umpire, pointed to his foot, who looked down and was like, what? And then he like lifted his foot off the ground to like, I guess, show him like, look, I got hit in the foot. And the umpire immediately ejects him. Like, what are you doing? You can't take your uniform off. Like, that's against the rules. Immediately throws him out of the game. Altuve is screaming, and it's just the sight of him with a naked foot, knowing what we know about what's happened in the past, hilarious to me, Warren. I couldn't get enough of it. It would have been better if the Padres could actually close out the game.
Sure.
But Altuve got replaced, and immediately the batter that replaced him hit the game winner. So it still worked out for the Astros in the end. But funny little story I had to share. I could have got a huge kick out of it.
Well, yeah, I think he got a huge kick out of himself with his bare foot there on the dirt. I hate the Astros. So I fire truck the Astros. I especially hate Altuve and Alex Bregman and Justin Verlander. I think really the last holdovers from the 2017 team. And if there's any others, I hate them all too. Those are the memorable ones. Look, like I wish they hadn't been slightly more or slightly less mediocre than my Mariners this year. But at the end of the day, they got enough of what they needed out of the pieces that they trust, including one of the best offenses in the league, right?
Yes.
To like put themselves in a position where it's going to be tough for us to catch them. We do have, of course, a series against Houston before the end of the season.
Could
And
be huge.
right.
Huge.
It's still the most likely path for Seattle to make the playoffs. I would say is taking out Houston from the division, but it's not easy and it's not likely. And it's a little too late, unfortunately. And Houston, I don't know, man. I didn't think they deserved to be this low, only because, man, I have to respect the team that's going to end up winning the division after all, like they usually do. But you have to, when you think about the story you just shared with me and you look around at this team and you see how aged our Verlander is and how potentially an Alex Bregman isn't even on this team next year.
Runs back to back, right?
This can very much feel like, if even I'm being, loosely optimistic, this does feel like the last Astros team, the last of the dominance, because they haven't even really been that dominant. And Seattle, as well as Texas, as well as Oakland, all these question marks swirling around the rest of the division. I feel like a couple of those teams are closer to answering them than others, and this could be the last Houston team. But there's still
Bregman's a free agent, right?
Right. I do believe he's
probably gone.
Right. I don't know why they'd want to. He hasn't been enough to get another lengthy contract for this Astros team, who still wants to solidify themselves as the divisional kings. They'll probably take a swing on somebody else and find themselves taking a little bit of a step back next year, which should be enough for other teams to sneak in. Anyway, this feels like the last Houston team, but they're still the Houston team. And that's why I'm surprised they're this low, but I get it. Their record was not convincing this week. It just is a bummer. It hasn't proven to be enough for Seattle to climb back into the race more staunchly, but we'll talk about that shortly. But first, Dan, that was not the Texas team I thought you'd talk about next. I think the appropriate Texas team to throw under the bus right now is the defending champions, who have no chance at defending said championship. I mentioned how that's a deflating circumstance at the top of the show. And because Houston gets to push their way into potential playoffs, it's by default. I simply must put the Rangers next, my guy. Yeah. They did go 7-6 this week, trying to save some face, but Corey Seager's out for the rest of the season. We saw DeGrom come back and have a good performance against my Mariners in that game, which eventually was won by the Mariners, however, who did take that series 3-1. The Mariners did. The Rangers also got swept by Arizona in a 2-game set, which was not a good look with where Arizona has been slipping up. They did, however, save some face by winning series against the Angels 3-4 and the Yankees 2-3. So a team that, we know that they're armed with enough youth that there's plenty of excitement for years in the future. We know that this is a team that can have a puncher's chance next season. We also know that they're an organization that's been drained of a lot of their farm pieces, like Houston. I know I'm leaning on that a lot, but they've done so much to set up the previous year and this year as Texas time, and now they've failed to make that a reality this year. So the vibes have to be pretty darn low for champions who don't get to try to defend their crown. This is why they're here for me, Dan. How do you feel about the Rangers? And am I off base, man? I do personally feel like they have more questions than a Seattle team, especially with us already making our move into a new managerial position. It'll be interesting to see which of the two teams between Texas and Seattle are better in this division next year. How do you feel Texas shapes up as they start to look towards 2025?
I think you'll see a lot of the same core players returning next year. You'll have a lot of hopefully injured players coming back healthy, which should really give you a whole new revamped rotation. That's going to be key.
Yeah.
I hope that they'll get some depth pieces to assist the offense, because it clearly wasn't enough this year. And yeah, the struggles were a little, what's the word? They were more extreme than it probably seemed, just due to all the injuries happening as rapidly as they were. But you had Wyatt Langford had a great showing in his rookie year. You still had productive years from some of your other younger players, so it certainly can still be competitive going forward. But it's a sad way to kind of end the year. But I will say at least they're kind of ending it a little bit more positively than, say, like we were talking about Oakland, for example. he's probably outside of a playoff spot and is just kind of letting it all fade out. Like the Texas does still seem to be playing with a little bit of grit and trying to make some noise, and we saw that especially in that series against Seattle. I mean, they probably, like we said, don't have a great chance, but they're certainly not playing like it. So,
oh yeah. They were definitely trying to play spoiler for a second with us, and
definitely.
I was grateful we turned the opportunity away generally. But yeah, they're a team that was riddled with injuries for sure. You got to put them in the Atlanta pool in that way, where it's like they could have been so much more ready if injuries hadn't been such a plague. Go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, I have to mention they just called up Kumar Rocker, one of their highest ranking pitching prospects they drafted 2 years ago. He just got over Tommy John surgery after the Mets actually drafted him, and he refused to report and therefore re-entered the draft and got drafted by Texas. So yeah, I love that guy. But he's very highly touted. He came up, had his first game, 7 strikeouts through 4 innings, a 2.25 ERA. Not too bad. If you consider him, Eovaldi, DeGrom, I mean, I don't think Scherzer will pitch next year, but let's say he does come back for one more year. That could be a terrifying rotation and certainly be up there with you guys in Seattle. So
thanks for that, Dan. For more optimism on the Rangers, you could talk about how Josh Smith has been a revelation for them this year, right? How you still have Corey Seager under contract forever, how Wyatt Langford will continue to take steps forward, how Nathaniel Lowe is also a nice, stable hand for this group. You have to look at the Adolis Garcia and Leody Taveras names and wonder, one's a veteran that maybe, was incredible in the playoffs last year, but he only contributed like 0.1 WAR this year. Is he honestly just overrated, or what keeps him from being consistent? And then you look at Taveras, a younger guy in his second complete year, if I'm not mistaken, who just didn't take the big steps forward that you need a piece like him to. Could also be a question mark for their lineup. But yeah, okay, fine, Dan. Friendly reminder that Texas could be better next year, but at the same time, I just feel like they're banking too much on veteran pieces that need to prove they're still that good. And I have a hard time investing in that mentally and emotionally. We'll see what their play does to convince me otherwise. But that's how I feel about Texas. I do think they're a decided half step behind Seattle's approach, but I have to because I'm a fan. So there it is. Dano, there we go. That's where I felt Texas belonged. Where do you feel which team is worthy, I suppose, of following Texas after this? And gosh, I hope we're at least going to stick to teams that are definitely mathematically eliminated, though I know Seattle's time is coming.
Well, the vibes say what they say, Warren, but no, you're right. Let's do the Washington Nationals because they can't be any higher than this.
Yeah, that's fair. And I got one more to follow after that too, before we really start looking around. Washington, though, you warned us, right? There are several teams out there playing spoiler.
This love it.
Yeah. This is one of the National League teams doing it the most effectively. Talk to us about it.
Oh, man. I mean, where to even begin? So this team has completely gone in with the youth movement, okay? Like their entire roster is either rookies or guys with like 2 years experience. And they're just splitting everything, Warren. They split a 2-gamer with Miami. They split a 4-gamer with Pittsburgh. They split a 2-gamer with Atlanta. They actually won 3-1 for another 4-game series against Miami. And they have lost the last 2 against the Mets, and they better lose tonight too, Warren. I'm telling you right now. But it's not over. They do have 3 games against Kansas City and 3 against Philly. Both of those matchups can prove to be impactful in the wild card races. Like they're like the Oakland of the National League. Like every one of Oakland's matchups is like Detroit, Seattle, Texas, Houston. Like that's what the Nationals are looking at right now. And I gotta say, Warren, like I talked about it last time, and I have to say it again, they continue to play better baseball in the second half. They continue to steal bags at the best rate in the National League. Well, I shouldn't say the best rate, but at the highest clip. They're all rookie outfield of Wood, Cruz, and Young has actually been pretty impressive to watch. I will say the errors are happening all over the field. I think that's to be expected with guys of this age, right? Like as they get through the year. That's definitely, that cost the Nats one of their wins against the Mets and might continue to. But really promising the progress that they're making and just winning these games down the stretch when they could easily have thrown in the towel like everybody else. Like every year, the Nats are all in on doing this, on being spoiler. And I'm actually concerned about them in the division, like that they're making good ground with some of these younger players that I think will pay dividends next year. And they could actually see the fruits of this rebuild coming through in the next 1 to 2 years, less than 3 years, I would say. Warren, like they could probably leapfrog one of the teams ahead of them and certainly be back in the dance before Miami.
I think it's exciting to say that because this looks like the next Baltimore squad that grew itself from the ground up with all of the assets they accumulated dating back to that championship win in 2019. It's cool to see that Washington Nationals baseball is not futile. And it's cool to see them be, a pain in the butt for teams that are just better composed than them right now. It's great to see that organization isn't just resigned to being a basement dweller year in and year out, like so many perennial losers tend to be in Major League Baseball. Hint, hint, wink, wink for who comes next.
Honestly, we'll tune back in a few years to see if they win again. But like when you want to see how a rebuild should be done, like look at the 2020 Nationals. They tore it all down. They suffered for a few years, and they're going to play good baseball next year.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch their youth mature. A Dylan Cruz and a James Wood, these are great players to build around. You still have a burgeoning superstar in CJ Abrams, who you recently acquired yourself, getting Juan Soto, right, out of the Nationals and over to San Diego. So he's been great. He's been great as a spiritual successor to the superstar role that Juan Soto provided. So
Mackenzie Gore was part of that return too. He's still their ace.
And to your point about stolen bases, man, you're right. They became the most stealing team in the league, even more so than those Cincinnati Reds that we often commented they seem to be copying, right?
Yeah.
So it's good stuff, man. Washington is a adaptable and frustrating franchise for their opponents, and it's only a matter of time before they're playing baseball that matters again, even more so than they have this month playing spoiler to the Stars. So kudos to them. Kudos to Washington. I am a fan. I just accidentally closed our notes, Dan. How embarrassing. So this will be interesting as I try to reopen them quickly, but I knew who I was picking next. I just said hint, hint, wink, wink. Now at number 15 to the teams that are perennial losers year in and year out. And here's one of them. But at 15, I would like to say maybe the winds of change are altering the direction of this specific ship. That's right. It's the Buccos. It's the Pirates at number 15. I have to say it's been a storyline all year that I feel like there could be winning baseball on the horizon for the Pirates. And I think Captain Paul Skeens is bringing that horizon to this black and yellow pearl. What do you think, bud? Talk to me. The Pittsburgh Pirates were fun this year. And, we've seen big pitching names debut in the past, like Strasburg did, Cole did, right? This isn't the first game-changing arm to come to Pittsburgh. I wonder, is this the one that's going to signal a new era for Pittsburgh baseball? Or is he just another one waiting to be offloaded to a bigger market team so that Pittsburgh can rotate themselves back down to the basement?
I mean, I know what answer you want, Warren, but I can't help but see Skeens pitching and just see all the pitchers that have left that organization, and I don't want that to be it. There are pieces on the offensive and the position player side of the ball, but there's not a lot else on the pitching side. So unless they make some moves for some impact arms, not to the level of Skeens, of course, he's your ace, but if you can get some more impact arms to have a rotation around him, then you could definitely be that kind of impactful team.
So you don't think Jared Jones is at least capable of being one of those arms? He's been, especially earlier on in the year, potential, rookie of the year kind of conversation.
He has, definitely. Sophomore year is always a question mark. We'll see it because if, after getting through a whole season, depending on where their pitch count is at, how they react in a second year. Seen a lot of guys kind of take a dive in terms of pitches they can actually throw in the second year. But you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But my point more so is that they're missing enough pieces that a return for Skeens is going to be like super attractive. And that's what I worry about with the organization, right? They keep Skeens for 2 more years. They get to the end of his rookie deal. He continues to be great. They know that they'd have to pay a top dollar for him, and they might be able to, but how do you judge that value against what you could get in return for him? Which is what they've done every time. And we know that's not the long-term answer. But history tells us that that's what they usually do, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them do that again, unfortunately.
Oh man, yeah, I'd love to see winds of change. Of course, you're totally right that I want to see black and yellow baseball matter again, only because I like rooting for underdogs, and the Pirates are just basement dwellers all the way.
We know you want to see Skeens in teal and black.
Ooh, teal and black. You just told me. I mean, I don't know if we have that color scheme in Seattle, but I would love that. What an incredible get that would be.
Make that color scheme. No, you guys have those. You beat us in those beautiful the black pants, blue and gold trim. Those are so nice.
Our City Connects, we rode those several days in a row because we were on a winning streak and we were trying to ride that energy, and that it got halted last night against the Yankees. But we are literally talking about the Ron lovable losers right now.
You're right. Sorry.
Poor Pittsburgh, losing their spotlight even now. So yeah, I was curious if you were convinced that this could be a new era of Pittsburgh baseball. I suppose this offseason could be phenomenally telling here or there, or a couple off seasons from now as Skeens' contract gets ready to expire. But you have to think O'Neal Cruz is a young piece of the future if he can stop striking out so much. You have to think that they can, Rowdy Tellez had its moments. So like having other veteran muscle around the lineup could prove hopeful. Andrew McCutchen might not return. You're right. Continuing the conversation we had last week, but he's, who else can you sign somebody else to fill that role? Jack Solowinski is getting better, by the way, as an outfield bat. I love me some Connor Joe, even though he's more like of a glue guy. And even then he's not nearly as capable. Like there's pieces in place that still make me feel like Pittsburgh can take a step forward with a potent offseason. It's just going to be time that tells us if that's their mindset or if they're still just looking for the best offer to continue their rotation of being the feeder of the bigger markets, right? And I would like them to not be, but yeah, I understand that is the trend year in and year out. So it's appropriate for them to be right in the middle of the pool right now. Are you a team trying to be better or not? You can argue either side. Wouldn't you agree?
Definitely.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see with Pittsburgh, but hey, number 15 isn't the worst place to be in our penultimate episode of the season. My dude, number 14 is next. Your choice is appropriate. Let me know who you're thinking.
Yeah, well, this team's is pretty high up here. They should be happy to be this far up. Let's go with the Colorado Rockies.
Dude, you want to talk about teams playing spoiler? This is my choice. They're maybe the second most potent spoiler for us to acknowledge this week in the National League, especially because they've had a winning record out of these Rockies. And guys, just wait till we remind you who they've had that winning record against. It's actually really funny and awesome. 8-6 was their record. So first they dropped 2 of 3 to Atlanta. Not helpful if you're rooting for the various Mets out there trying to get into the postseason. They did take 2 of 3 from Milwaukee. They then dropped 2 of 3 to Detroit. Gosh darn it, Detroit. They win 2 of 3 against Chicago. What a death knell. That was the beginning of the end for the Cubs. That was crazy to see that happen in Coors Field, of course. We said that somebody was going to get cored out, and it was definitely the Cubs. And now they've won 2 of 3 against the Diamondbacks to continue helping them look a little more futile here as we're entering the last week of the season. The Rockies, man, who'd have thought? And yeah, you want to talk about a franchise trying to turn around. Are we sleeping on the idea that maybe the Rockies will be better a year or two from now? We usually say no, but it's been fun watching them play spoiler this past week. Talk about it.
Yeah, on the road too, Warren. Like what? Like they have. It's worth noting.
Yeah.
4 of their last 5 games at home they've won, which is
Right.
something we've talked about before.
Yep.
But yeah, 4 wins on the road is pretty impressive for this Colorado team. And I mean, looking down the stretch, Warren, I think 2 weeks ago, my thing with the Rockies was probably going to be that they would solidify some postseason spots for some teams. But they're doing the opposite of that by winning games that we don't expect them to. They have 2 series against the Dodgers, which I would have said, oh, that's going to solidify the Dodgers a division title, right?
Right.
Now I really don't know, Warren. 3 of those games are at home, and 3 are in LA. So now it starts making you think, with the Padres as close as they are, could the Rockies play spoiler to the Dodgers at the close of the season? I mean, that would be unbelievable. And you know the Dodgers are going to be considering like who they're going to have taking into the postseason. It would be amazing to see the Rockies just roll out like Austin Gomber and pitch a shutout in the last day of the season. I would love that. So that's what I'm rooting for.
Yeah, let's watch the Rockies over the course of their final week for sure, because they are playing pretty inspired baseball at this stage against whomever's across the field from them. And at the end of the day, it's so much fun to watch Ezekiel Tovar or Brenton Doyle or the litany of other young talent that's making their way up in this Colorado organization. It's fun to see them play with poise and say with some confidence that they belong in this division. So it is a fun, compelling storyline to think, could this be the beginning of big change for them, especially following a Pittsburgh team we just discussed? It could be that the Rockies are the other team with a shot at some upside in the future, especially with the Giants being so confusing in their direction right now. I would
Right.
love to see the Colorado Rockies not be in the basement of this division in a year or two. And there are baseball players out there, man, that are playing with poise. They just need to rotate another group of potential starting pitchers into this camp, right?
Yeah.
Gosh, if they don't just draft excellent starting pitchers for the rest of time, I'm sure the offense could come. They need to make sure the arms are great because Coors Field is so gosh darn volatile.
That's the thing. I don't even know. I mean, I speculated at the start of the year in one of our pre-division breakdowns that they need to not necessarily go for the best arms, but for like guys who are going to make maybe low speed contact
Yep.
or like high
Yep.
altitude, that at a place like that, it'll just be pop outs every time instead of home runs. Like,
Yep.
I don't know. You need to be really specialized, I feel like, to bring in the right kinds of pitchers. Because even this year, I remember Warren was talking about a couple of guys that I remember I spotlighted, like, oh, this guy and this guy are going to do really well. I unfortunately can't tell you who they are, but I know they didn't do well because nobody really did.
Right. Hey, here's a blockbuster trade for you. Let's get Logan Webb out of the Giants and into Colorado's purple and black, right? Because it
Okay.
is the contact heavy pitchers, the ones that create the ground balls that will succeed best in a Colorado system.
Right.
And so it would be fun to see that trade happen and get a couple of younger bats over to San Francisco, give them a couple of years to figure it out and give Colorado a chance to climb out of the basement with a pitcher like that on their camp.
Yeah.
But hey, I doubt that Colorado has that kind of ambition. I remember seeing something hilarious about their theme nights on the schedule. I feel like clicking on it just to double check, but I felt like there was a first responders night on a Monday, and then on a Tuesday it was like tequila and tacos night. And I'm like, man, you guys are just playing with fire with how you'll celebrate the people keeping everybody healthy, and then let's have debauchery the next night.
Yeah,
You're funny.
tequila.
You're more concerned about the climate of what it's like to be a fan sitting in the stands. You want to have fun, you want to enjoy yourself. But hey, how about winning some baseball games, Colorado? You can do it if you choose to make some steady choices. I'm rooting for you. Good luck, Collie. But yes, you're right. They did not deserve to rise any higher up the conversation. And that means the only other team that's left that hasn't got a chance at a postseason run should probably go next. Yes, the unlucky number 13, the final team without anything left to look forward to in terms of Fangraphs playoff odds, Cincinnati Reds, ladies and gentlemen. And gosh,
yeah. But what a week.
What could have been for these Reds? You're right. When you look at a week like this, where they go 9-5, this is the most spoiler-friendly squad in Major League Baseball this week. Let's talk about why. At 9-5, they did sweep the Houston Astros. Huge punch to their nose. Really grateful. Appreciate it. Don't know if it'll matter, but thanks. They also bent over backwards to make sure your Mets look good, right? They dropped 2 of 3 to your Mets. I'm sure you're grateful. They also beat Atlanta in their little 1-game makeup, so that also helped you. You're welcome. They lost 2 of 3 to St. Louis in what was an exercise of futility between the two teams before winning 2 of 3 against Minnesota, doing me a favor. God bless you. And now they beat Atlanta again yesterday in game 1 of their series. I think it's a 3-gamer now, and they could really help continue to be spoilers for your chances, the Mets, that is, to bust into the playoffs at the expense of these Braves. So you got to love Cincinnati. Aren't you guys just everybody's best friend this week? At least on this show. Have lucky number 13 for sure.
I love it. I mean, the Phillies and Braves have been struggling for sure, but yeah, it's just been like every fan rooting against, your divisional teams so far this year. And, the Reds, I'm happy to see them still finishing on a strong note. They performed really well down the stretch last year. It ended up being too little too late. This year, it's not going to be quite as close, but it's another situation of them performing well down the stretch and just not being enough. So you need to see a better start from the Reds next year, what we haven't seen the last couple of years, and injuries have been a part of that. But the other part of it is like Ellie De La Cruz is 64 stolen bases, which is incredible. Spencer Steer, second at 25. Yeah, but you need to get multi-dimensional with the offense. That we talked about how they're just hit and run. That was the story of that offense last year. This year, teams definitely played against them a little bit. They pitched them a little bit differently, a lot more low contact to try and keep them in the ballpark. And you saw them react to that. And that's okay. The offense is still good. But clearly they fell a step behind. And, despite the good play that they've had this week against teams that are struggling with injuries, like I think every team that they played against pretty much is, and every team is right now, the Reds are going to have to make a couple key decisions. Like I look at like Ty France. Is that somebody you want to bring back next year? I know you probably have your own feelings on that, Warren, but I don't know that he's really done enough at this point. Ahmed Rosario is another one that's going to be going. I think this is a real chance. I'm falling short of calling this year a disappointment for Cincinnati. I feel like I wanted to see more of an improvement, and we'll see where they finish the year. But overall, I personally feel like I expected more of an improvement. So I need to see that next year. I'm curious if you feel the same or if you feel like they did take a step this year.
Okay. So no, I think you have a point. I think that they surprised everybody a little bit last year with the spark plug that was Ellie De La Cruz that transformed so much of what seemed possible in Cincinnati. Plus, you had the benefit of a Joey Votto on his retirement run, right?
Yeah.
And he was still slugging baseballs left and right, so that was helpful. What happened this year was that we opened the season thinking, look at all this, the grab bag of different assets this team could potentially have. They could mix and match a lot of the different players in their lineup to try to have a puncher's chance against a lot of different offensive and defensive approaches against them. So what I feel like overall happened is that the coaching is a little exposed. I want to say the managing is a little bit exposed. I think this team could have been better if there was more intentionality to how this lineup was built against their opponents. I think there's a little bit too much throwing whatever they have at the wall and not enough doing it with intentionality. That's what happened this year. They failed to counterpunch teams that were better prepared for who they were last year, and they could not have a clear vision on who they wanted this offense to be. So now they need to make steps towards figuring that out into the next season. They need to definitely help shore up pitching some more. I mean, they gave away one of the more compelling pieces at the trade deadline in Frankie Montas, who had a great year for them. Hopefully Hunter Green can continue to develop into an arm that can stabilize itself and be a big piece of your rotation moving forward. Andrew Abbott's also huge for them as that horizon comes closer. So it's a team that needs to give themselves more identity and make sure it's not just the hit and run method. You're right, that teams were better ready to counter. I mean, look at it. They did take a step back even in the stolen bases numbers because Washington got to surge ahead of them. So they need to find more identity. They really need to know who they are a little bit better. And if the general managers that they've put in place can't help this team take a step forward next year, they may need to look at a change there, because the pieces in place should be good. They just need a brain to put it all together. Ha! That's how I feel about the Reds. And it's funny because the pundits out there had them sneaking their way into the playoffs all over the place. They really thought Ellie Steer, Matt McLean, who didn't even get to be a piece this year, right?
No.
Wow. See, that's going to be big. Getting Matt McLean back is going to be what helps this team augment themselves to be something different next year. So Cincinnati still got plenty of stock behind them. Do not expect this to be anywhere near their final form, right?
They won't all be back next year, but Warren, let's remember, like Candelario, Austin Wins, Encarnacion Strand was on this team, Stuart Fairchild, Nick Martini, right. We can go through the injury list for every team, but some teams it just feels so much worse than others. And the Reds, like even on the pitching side of things, it's been a challenge all year for them.
Yep. Yeah. And it's a tough stadium to pitch in. Don't forget, sure. Apart from Coors Field, Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati is one of the most hitter friendly parks. So it's not an easy formula to find. And we're seeing Cincinnati still trying to figure it out. Plenty of reason for optimism, but they do have some things to do on that list, the to-do list, that is. Everybody else who's left in our countdown in the top 12, ladies and gentlemen, has a shot at playoffs or are locked in. And now the real tough dominoes start falling. I bet I know who you can go to for number 12, Dan, and I wonder if you're going to make it so number 1.
There's a lot we can go to for sure, but keeping with what you were saying, Warren, we don't really want to have non-playoff teams too high up. So I think we're going to have to go with the Tampa Bay Rays at this point, who, for my money, are pretty much out of it.
Right. And for everybody, including Fangraphs money, it's the case. But man, oh man, if this is a Tampa Bay team in its like half-cocked mode, and they still, in the last week of the season, have a chance to back into a playoff, then we all just need to put respect on the organization out in Tampa, because man, even in a down year, they are a pain in the freaking butt. We've literally been flipping coins every show on where Tampa stands, to the point where here we are in our last show of the season and they still have a playoff chance. Stop it. That's crazy. Congrats to Tampa. They are obviously, they know who they are, right? As an organization in the way they develop, and they deserve a ton of credit. And that's all I would like to open with. Tell us how you feel about Tampa as you put them here.
Yeah, no surprise at all from the pitching staff. The organization has always been the place to go to if you're a struggling pitcher. We saw more of that again this year. I mean, Zach Little, Shane Baz, Taj Bradley, you name it. They've all done great. Pepiot, of course.
Yep.
And then, like, obviously, we know we've talked about Wander Franco and the players that have left the organization. But even since the trade deadline, the players that they've sold, Warren, and, the offense is still the problem like it was before. But like you said, they're still in there. They're still competitive. They still have some impact bats. Some of the returns they got haven't been the best. Christopher Morel was one of the ones who's really kind of fallen off a cliff, unfortunately, since he joined the team right before the deadline. But,
right.
The team overall is like, it got, let's be honest, it was not expecting to have such a hard drop-off in the offseason. The Franco situation, I think they were not expecting him to come back, but it was still a question mark until relatively late into that offseason, really into the start of before the season started. So, even with the trades that they made, getting back some of the returns they made, I think the organization should be really happy for how well that they've done, for how they're staying in it even now this late in the game. And we talked about this division going into next year. Like, I could see Warren, the Rays probably grab a couple position players. They moved out term, but they can get back some talented players and get right back to where they were, I think, relatively quickly, because there's really no questions for me on the pitching side of the ball.
This team, they're so good at developing pitchers. They're one of the best camps in Major League Baseball for turning out pitching. At least it would seem that way. They continually take arms and turn them into household names. Yeah. And they just brought up Junior Caminero, who has been quite the esteemed prospect for some time. So you have to expect him to take the spiritual place of Randy Arozarena, who had plenty of term, as you said, right? Yep. And then listen, Christopher Morel was given up on too quickly by the Cubs. I feel that way personally. Like, I almost felt like him and Paredes getting swapped was a bit like a choose your own adventure kind of story, not a indictment of either player. Honestly, I just feel, yeah. So I feel like Christopher Morel wasn't expected to rise into a prominent role this year, but we'll figure it out in time for next year. You still have batters all up and down this lineup who can put bat to ball and do it effectively. Tampa's a really strong organization and has been for a good 10 years at making the most out of very little. So celebrate them again this year, if only that, well, they're not making the playoffs for the first time in a while, like quite a while.
Yes.
But they will be ready to march towards prominent baseball again as likely as next year, man. This is not a team you should count out moving forward, period. And you're right. They know how to make arms. Their lineup is they've just got a good organization for development, and you can't coach that. Ironically, you just can't.
And every year I'd like to think like, oh, maybe they can't hit it on every guy, or this guy's still going to struggle, or maybe this won't be the year. And they still do it.
They still do it. They are one of the most well-oiled organizations in baseball, at least right now, in terms of reliably producing talent and making smart decisions on who goes in and goes out. We'll have to see how they fit in next year. It's amazing that there are question marks right up to this week. I mean, kudos, Tampa. You guys deserve a World Series soon, man. I would like to see that for them. They're doing a great job with their organization overall from decade to decade right now. Good 20 years, I'd say, of stability. I might be exaggerating, but no, not really. I remember, they were garbage for the first couple of years of their lives, but have figured it out since.
Yeah, they had that appearance a few years ago, right?
Yeah, they went to the World Series, so they've done more than Seattle's done. Oops, did I just say that? No, guys, it's not time to talk about Seattle, because honestly, Seattle did more this week to try to say that they can sneak their way into a race than the next team, a team that usually Dan does the honors for, but it's my turn. Dan, this is for you, okay, buddy? The Atlanta Braves need to go next.
Okay.
Just outside of the top 10. They were slightly more mediocre record-wise than my Mariners, and only slightly. They were 500, were the Braves. And, man, they got punched in the nose by Cincinnati last night, and that's what I remember, even more than the way the Yankees embarrassed us. But anyway, I'm digressing immediately. The Braves need every win they can get, right, in order to make sure they make the playoffs, which was not the storyline we expected for Atlanta when the season opened. But yes, they've been among the most injury-marred clubs in the league. So is it all their fault? No. And they've done a respectable job remaining in the race, but they might, the fat lady might sing for this squad here in the next couple of days if they're not careful. Sure, they won series against Colorado and in Toronto, but you have to if you're protecting the opportunity to go to the playoffs. You couldn't beat Cincinnati in your one-off game, nor could you beat them last night. You got a couple more chances, but that's not a good look. You also split a series with Washington, playing spoiler, are you, DC? Of course. And finally, a split with LA, the Dodgers, that is, says, even if you make it to the dance, are you even going to be able to keep up with the tempo? So, Dano, that's where Atlanta sits, just outside our top 10 at 11. I think it's appropriate and fair, and I bet you're excited for that number. Tell me how you feel.
Yeah, for me, Warren, that series against the Dodgers is probably the most indicative. That's, something a lot of us predicted. It's a very plausible playoff scenario. It has been all year, maybe less so now. But I think I've said it a couple times. The bar for the Braves is beating the Phillies, because that's something they haven't been able to do. But even beyond that, it's the Dodgers. It's beating the Dodgers. It's being a better team than the Dodgers. And all year, we've talked about the power, the diminishing power from the Braves. Marcell Ozuna was their main power provider, and this team got to the postseason last year off of power. It's part of the reason they got there. That drop-off was pretty noticeable this year. And actually, Warren, I think it's worth noting that Ozuna has no home runs in the last month. His batting average has dipped. He's still over 300, but just by a hair. His slugging is still pretty high, but overall, I don't know if you're starting to see just the toll of the whole season catch up with Ozuna. If he's just getting more selective pitches, I really couldn't tell you, but the power is not there. And that's pretty concerning because he's been the main piece. So with that gone, you're seeing that lack of power throughout the rest of the lineup. It's not to say they don't hit home runs. They do hit home runs, but the thing is, they were a power team, so they could still hit home runs, but if they're not that same power team they were before, they don't have the on-base percentage to keep up. And that's why we've been seeing them take this skid as they have. For this is like the third show we've done in a row where I think the Braves have gotten either a losing record or closer to 500 than what they were at the start of the year. And this is kind of shown. I was looking into their runners in scoring position ranks, Warren, because they've been an okay on-base team. But in runners in scoring position, their on-base percentage tanks to 23rd in the league, and their OPS is 21st. So that has really kind of been their the main issue that they've been encountering. Obviously, Chris Sale, I still think is your Cy Young candidate for the National League. I would probably still put money on him. They're the new kind of revelation, and they called up Spencer Schwellenbach earlier this year, and he's been fantastic. His first 9 starts were a little shaky, but his last 9 have been excellent. So, like from a rotation standpoint, the Braves definitely can still be a pretty potent postseason team if they can get there. But I think their offense is going to rob them more. And I do, at this point, I very much see the Braves as the team that's going to miss out on the postseason. It will come down to that matchup that they're going to have against the Mets coming up here. And then the thing is, they got a tough series against the Royals. So even if they're a game or two ahead of the Mets at the conclusion of that series, the Mets go to Milwaukee and the Braves are going to play Kansas City. So it could still, the Braves could end up getting stomped on at the end there. I mean, it can go a million different ways. All in all, though, I would be very worried if I was a Braves fan with the way the team is performing. You saw your team with injuries, despite all that, persevere to win the World Series a few years back. Not seeing that this year. And they're just kind of like the Orioles, but maybe a little bit worse. They're just falling back. I think it's only a matter of time.
Well, talk about getting the team back together from that pivotal 2021 championship run, not quite panning out.
Right.
And the truth is where would they be is the take I have without Marcell Ozuna. Matt Olson's basically been not carpentering, but Chapmaning his way into helping this team, right? Like Olson's been about as good as Chapman was for the Giants, but Chapman was the guy for the Giants, and that's as far as they got. So I feel like without Ozuna, this team would have been out of the running a lot sooner. Right. It's because he's deflating at the end of the year that they're losing all of that potency, that edge. You need more from Orlando Arcia, who played the next most games offensively. You need more from Jared Kelenic. Thank you very much. Can we do a little Met Mariner handshake?
Yes, absolutely.
That Jared Kelenic continues to miss the opportunity.
We were worried, though, man.
Right.
It wasn't looking good.
I was worried he was going to turn into somebody, but he didn't. Austin Riley probably gets an acquittal, and you may argue Michael Harris II does too, but you just need more out of the lineup otherwise. Where was Ozzie Albies and Sean Murphy? Where was Travis d'Arnaud, right? Like they contribute WAR, but they didn't contribute enough WAR. They didn't contribute enough potency.
Albies has been out a couple months, so he should be back this weekend, but that's probably too little too late. You've been out for 2 months with a bad wrist. Good luck finding your swing in the last week of the season.
Yeah. Right. So you got the injuries, of course, being the pivotal storyline that really sunk this battleship. And you can't be too hard on the Braves for that. They couldn't have banked on Ronald Acuna having a repeat of 2021. You couldn't have, even worse than that, right? He had no season to speak of before going down. You couldn't really expect all the injury difficulties, and they did their best to scramble. It's just the wrong series of decisions might cost this team a playoff berth. And if they do get that playoff berth, you do have to expect them to be one of the more vulnerable outs. Spencer Strider will be back, right? There's so many reasons why this team was not in its final form at any point this year. And you got, at least at this point now, with our final show before the end of the season, dude, we can at least say we're sorry to Atlanta that it didn't get to be a little bit
Yeah.
more alike to what they wanted, right?
Especially because they've been through this before, like
Yep.
exactly this, just destroyed by
Yep.
injuries. And like when you see guys like I see 3 guys on the starting roster who were bench pieces on other teams, like Gio Urshela, Roman Laureano, and Whit Merrifield. Like those are starters
Yep.
on the Braves right now, one of the deepest teams we talked about at the start of the year. So you know what? The bug probably hit them way harder than a lot of other teams in the league, amongst other
Yep.
things, and
They did.
it sucks.
Yeah, they did get walloped by the injury bug big time. It'll be fun to see how they respond next year. Talk about the chip on the shoulder getting exponentially bigger. We're just
Yes.
poking the brave bear is what we're doing, or at least the fates of baseball have done. So we expect a very angry Atlanta team next year for sure. Watch out for them. They're going to make some big moves in the offseason to hopefully avoid this happening again. But, oh well, it's a brave new world, one where Atlanta and the Braves may be out of the playoffs this year still. Just a few days left to determine if that's the case. Dan, your turn. Top 9. It's fun. I know you got to do it, man. Just do it. Let's have it. I really don't deserve to be much higher.
Oh, no. Warren, you gotta keep waiting. I'm sorry. I think you
You're
do
fun.
deserve to be a little bit higher because there's problems. There's problems. The vibes are not as strong as they might seem in LA, Warren.
Oh,
The Los Angeles Dodgers.
what is wrong with you, Dan?
Things are
Stop
shaky.
it.
The vibes are shaky.
Stand down. Dan Harrow, what are you doing? The top 10 team in the league is the Los Angeles Dodgers? What is... Explain yourself, young man.
Listen, it's been rough. There's only one series win over the last 2 weeks. And I mean,
okay.
And I have seen the one-dimensional offense that travels through Ohtani, and we know that's not this Dodger team. We know how deep this team is. We know that they're getting relatively healthy, but I watched some of these games, and Ohtani saved them in several of these games. So you could say that they're just taking it easy. That they probably have the division locked up. 2 series against the Rockies coming up. They probably don't need to worry about that series against San Diego, even if they lose all 3, as long as they take care of business with the Rockies. This all just feeds into trap mentality for me, Warren. Like, if you start sputtering as you're rolling down the hill here, and let's keep in mind that the Dodgers are just now bringing back a couple of pitchers, hoping that they can stay healthy going into the rest of the regular season, because Glasnow might be able to start one game, maybe, but probably not. So like Yoshi and Jack are basically your 1-2 guys, and it's not very deep after that. And we've talked about a couple teams today that were living and dying by either the offense or just the pitching. And we know that the power the Dodgers have, I haven't seen it these past 2 weeks, Warren. And I get nervous going into the postseason when teams start to slow up a little bit. That the Dodgers are a good team. We know that how good they can be. And I just talked about how that series win over the Braves, or the split, those last 2 wins, really cemented how much better the Dodgers are over the Braves in my mind. But I also just talked about how the Braves might not even make the postseason, and then let's factor in that this team might get a bye and how that's messed them up before. I start to get nervous, Warren, and I want to at least see them playing hot baseball rolling into it. And they're not doing that right now. And I would honestly, I think every team ahead of us on the list here, including your own, has been playing hotter baseball than the Dodgers have recently. It's not good.
Hey, an avant-garde decision, but not one without its reasoning. It's just an impressive shot to take at, the cosmically uncrowned champions that many would put these Dodgers in the bracket of. But you're right.
Well, they also lost to Miami, too.
They lost a dogfight too.
Yes.
They were going swing for swing against each other. So for Miami to outlast that at this stage of the season, surprising, sure. But I just see all I see in my head are players doing this, the little dance they do after every base hit. The Dodgers have a lineup that will always be capable of doing that at any given moment. The Dodgers have a pitching rotation that has been very shaky. I would say in that they've had to use so many different people to try to keep this thing afloat, that's maybe the spot that seems like the weakness for the Dodgers is just a lack of pitching stability. But
Yeah.
But if the offense is hot, you're just going to be seeing little dances from second base every
there
single.
is
Yeah.
something we should take into account, Warren, is we haven't seen Shohei in the playoffs. So I'm very much looking at this Dodger team like honestly, the Dodgers last year won 100 games and lost 62. This team has already lost 62. And yes, it's been more injured than that. And that's with Shohei and Yoshi. So I'm more of looking at the boat of like, I have no idea what impact Ohtani will make, but I do see this as a weaker team overall, due to injuries mostly, not on paper, but just due to injuries, a weaker team than last year. And I think the bye has screwed them almost every time. I mean, we'll get more into it next week, but nervous.
Now you're just starting to sound like somebody who is desperate for these Dodgers to lose when it counts most. And at this stage of the season, you have every right to be, because we're finally starting to see the shotgun point right at us, right? It's time for the Dodgers cannon to get put into place within the playoff bracket and to see if it can bowl over everyone else in the National League like it's been built to. And it's not even in its final form. So, Dan, you say all these things, but the Los Angeles Dodgers are terrifying, and we know it against and everybody who's playing LA from here to the end of the postseason bracket is quaking in their boots and asking themselves if they have enough to beat the Dodgers when it counts most.
Except for one team, I'll say. I think there's one team that's not afraid of the Dodgers. There's one team that wants the Dodgers. I think you know who it is.
The Diamondbacks?
No. I mean, I'm sure they do, but the Padres. I think the Padres only lost 2 or 3 games all year to the Dodgers. They destroyed them in the season series. And if they win their wild card matchup, they would play the Dodgers in the DS. And I think they want that bad. And I think that might be the only team the Dodgers don't want.
If that happens, we simply must reach out to one Dylan Rodriguez and one Adam Robin Stever and have one more reprisal of a group conversation.
Bookend our year.
Be exceptional. That would be exceptional. And San Diego has been amazing as it's blossomed into a true contender. Talk about a team that's made the right adjustments to prepare for the Dodgers specifically. You could be absolutely right, but we'll speak more on San Diego shortly, but not shortly enough. We will advance to the next team. You have compelling arguments to remind us why the Dodgers are still fragile. You do. And it is a really good one that you point out. Shohei hasn't been to the playoffs yet. But if there's one player in this generation that screams to me like they are ready for postseason play, it's Shohei Ohtani.
100%.
I'm not worried at all. I think we're in for a show for sure.
Yeah, I think he breaks
into the bracket.
I think he's probably bummed he can't pitch, and that makes me think he might pitch even more, because I know that they're just kind of teasing it like, oh yeah, he's throwing, like just to scare opponents, which I get. But let's be honest, like with the pitching situation the Dodgers have, if you need a win, you need a couple innings, throw Ohtani in there for the 8th and 9th. I mean, we've never seen anything like that in the postseason, so it would be unreal.
It would be pretty awesome. It would be pretty memorable. It's like one of those things that you remember an entire postseason for. Remember that one when Shohei came back a little early? It's like John Cena coming back at number 30 in the Royal Rumble and winning it, for those of you who speak wrestling. Or it's like Tom Brady throwing a touchdown pass after being injured the entire year to help his team win the Super Bowl. That kind of thing. That'd be fun. That'd be a fun story and certainly memorable. The Dodgers have so many paths to a championship that we are done talking about them, because we can do it again next week. All right, guys. Okay. Well, we're playing a little chicken with my team. I actually have to make it personal now, though. I'm going to let the Seattle Mariners slide again. Let's see if you kill them off next, especially when I kill off your Kansas City Royals as number 9 in this list. Hey, man, they went 500, which is a
Yeah,
worse record than what the Mariners could muster this week. So I'll dodge a bullet again. They are still 82 and 70, solidly over 500, totally okay to make the playoffs. We can say, I mean, I don't think there's a mathematical equation that leaves them out at this stage, but the
it'd be
Royals
unlikely.
are also breathing a little harder as they start to round the bases towards the final week of the season. They've lost 2 of 3 this week to Cleveland and to New York. The Yankees, that is. They swept Minnesota, which was huge. Another reason why Minnesota is really the easiest target for teams trying to bust into the American League playoff bracket. They also took 2 of 3 from the Pittsburgh Pirates to regain some footing, but have since stumbled immensely against those darn Tigers, who we've yet to discuss as well into the top 10. They've lost their first 2 of 3 to the Tigers in the final chance to really underline their dominance against them. Strange, but another team that I am hypothesizing is coming in for one of those soft landings I mentioned earlier. This doesn't seem like a Kansas City team that's truly in danger. They're just not playing as inspired here in the last couple weeks. Dan, are you going to disagree with me on them? And how excited are you? You've called this team World Series bound. That's in our notes, and I love it. Do you still think
Yes.
Kansas City's the uncrowned American League champions? Quite the claim against the Guardians, Orioles, and Yankees, to say the least, among others.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your Royals at this stage.
I really think they can do it, dude. I really do. I think the
Sure.
division might be just out of reach because the Guardians have just played so well. So it's huge that the Royals were able to jump the Twins, and hopefully they can maintain that. I see the Twins. If a team falls out, I should say I see it being the Twins, to either the Tigers or the Mariners. I don't see the Royals losing that ground. I could be wrong, but if it works out that way, that would have the Royals probably playing Baltimore, and I'm not going to spoil that for potentially talking about it next time, Warren. But I'll just say I like that matchup a lot, and I see a path. I see a path for the Royals. I see a path for them. I think they're playing good baseball. The Vinny Bascantino injury was potentially soul crushing. They brought in Yuli Gurriel, who's done okay. Like, you can't really complain too much about a 40-year-old playing first base.
Right.
He's done pretty well. Tommy Pham has now been their leadoff guy, and he hasn't quite found that same level he did with Chicago initially, but he's doing better than he did with St. Louis. We've seen what teams with Tommy Pham do, Warren. We talked about it. I think that might
Yep.
have been the reason I went even more in on the Cardinals, but now he's a Royal, so it works out even better for me.
Yes, it does.
So I'm still pretty confident in this team. I think they have some of the best combination of starting rotation and bullpen that series against Baltimore. Like, if they can get past Baltimore, I don't see a whole ton of teams that can really go up against them. The only thing working against the Royals is their youth. In the very much in the same way Baltimore last year made the dance really hot, really good, and just kind of got reminded of like, this is playoff baseball. The Royals need to go through that. That could very
Yeah.
much be what happens this year. I could see them going on a miracle run, but I could see a scenario where they kind of get put in their place, and I think that might come down to the rotation, because when you're talking about individual matchups, as good as the Royals have been, they tend to lean on the bullpen more in the later half of the game, and that there are teams like Baltimore who tend to take advantage of other teams' bullpens. So I think the Royals, as they're built right now, they've done, well, first of all, just done a fantastic job from last year to this year in the turnaround. But I do see them as like playoff baseball team, and we'll see how far they can actually get and how they finish up the last of this final week of the season. But I still very much have them in the dance and potentially being dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. They've got a great starting rotation headlined by who was looking like my American League Cy Young winner in Seth Lugo for the longest time, right? But
Yeah.
Cole Reagans took a step forward with this rotation. Brady Singer has been tremendous, as he typically is for the camp.
Yeah.
Michael Wacha has slotted in well, and Michael Lorenzen, since getting picked up at the deadline, has contributed his own sub-2 ERA.
Yeah.
So the pitching from that standpoint's huge. And then another fun thing to point out is this has one of the more impressive 1-2 punches at the catcher position between Salvador Perez. Sure, we've sung his praises all year, but talk about some surprise from Freddie Fermin contributing his own 3.0 WAR. And what I want to say to that is having a reliable 1 and 2 in the backstop is an underrated way to provide a really important amount of stability to your team. Right. If you've got 2 quality catchers who can help guide a pitching rotation as potent as what Kansas City has brought to the table, you got a foundation that I think a lot of teams can sleep on. So a lot is buzzing around this Kansas City Royals team to have them be one of the more prepared camps going into the postseason, and experience is a fantastic Achilles heel. It really is. The only thing that can be a great counter to that is that you still have Salvador Perez on this squad, who went all the way. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, he did.
Yeah, with this Royals team in 2015. Right. He can look back at that time and provide experience and composure to this camp. So they do seem on paper like one of the best outside chances to take it all. I love the call. Could be super fun. It could be a really great Cinderella story. But yes, they do need to get through a minefield of almost objectively better baseball teams first. But stranger things have happened in baseball, my boy. So we'll see what that's exactly how it comes to pass for brand new superstar Bobby Witt Jr. and company. What an amazing camp. I just wish Vinny Pasquantino had been able to be with them, because he was so important to helping them be who they've been this year. And obviously a fan favorite, obviously a cultural favorite for them with, Pasquatch and all that stuff. But we'll see what happens. But a lovely story coming out of Kansas City for sure. Okay.
Love it.
All right, Dan. Well, it's your turn. Tag, you're it. Truthfully, there's actually one team on this list of remaining camps that was more mediocre than my own. I wonder if you'll do it. However, they're among today's biggest winners in the spirit of the baseball season.
Oh, I was about to do them, but you are absolutely right. And now I don't think I should. Oh, man, Warren, you know what?
My butthole's clenching with the anticipation, just like that team clinched earlier. Will Dan?
Yeah, they're fine. Yeah, I can't. I can't. The vibes are so. Yeah, no, I'm changing. It's the Detroit Tigers.
Whoa, another controversial choice, which means I'm killing myself after this, and we know it. But okay. Dan, fine. Go ahead and claim the Detroit Tigers get to go in the spot instead of the Pacific Northwest squad. But you really don't have much of a leg to stand on. These Tigers, without a shadow of the doubt, have been the biggest revelation, unfortunately, for American League Baseball since the All-Star break, and they're on fire this week with a 9-5 record, strong enough to truly say, you're going to have to take that playoff opportunity away from us pretty soon if you're not careful. They're right on the cusp of being that 6th playoff team. I'm so bummed. Talk to me about the Tigers.
So Detroit's coming on at absolutely the right time. I do not think it's any coincidence that Javi Baez has been hurt and not on the team.
All of a sudden exactly.
Seriously, that's Javi
Baez. Bye. Yeah.
He unfortunately is still your biggest dollar on the team next year. That sucks, but the youth has been excellent. I wanted to highlight Parker Meadows, because he has really taken a step. He was demoted back in May, and after 2 months down, he's made spectacular defensive plays. He's been a leader offensively. Totally great turn, handled his demotion the right way, which you don't always see. And he's been an impact player for them. They're honestly, whether or not they make the postseason, as long as they don't go too aggressive, this team can definitely make a couple of smart additions in the offseason and be very competitive. You're seeing the growth out of those younger guys like Yace Young, like Cole Keith. I mean, Spencer Torkelson was one that they knocked down and ended up bringing back up. I'm so glad they struggled like they did the first half of the year, because you are seeing the fruits of that right now.
Yeah.
And better to get that now and then roll into next year. When, by the way, you still have Tarek Skubal. He could be traded in the offseason, but I really don't think he will be. Considering the return that they got, they can swap more prospects for some more immediate help. This is a team that's really going the right way. And I got to say, I have it here, Warren. 24-20 over the past 5 weeks is the best record in the majors over that period. 2.52 ERA and a plus 60 run differential, least amount of runs and most amount of runs scored. So they're kind of just doing everything they need to all at once. Is it enough to jump into the postseason? Maybe. They're not a postseason team in my mind. If they make it, that's an overachievement on their half and probably somebody else screwing up. And, if that's the Twins, then I think that would make a lot of sense from things we've talked about with the Twins already. So I'd be super happy for Detroit to make it, but I do see them as essentially a non-playoff team. It's very impressive that they're still here, but I wouldn't be totally surprised if they do miss.
Oh, well, they own the tiebreaker to my Mariners. And so that's why it's kind of hard for me to put them below Seattle at this point objectively. The offense has picked up in a major way. The youth movement is working out. You're seeing them cut their teeth, climb the mountain, get stronger as the year goes on, and it's blossoming right at the right time in a way that pundits suggested we were all sleeping on. So a certain prophecy coming true is seeming to be playing out, and I like them more than I like Minnesota for the playoffs at this moment. So I have to say that they're the more likely winner of that sixth playoff position from my mind than Seattle or Minnesota this year. Bummer, but that's how I feel. I think they've earned it, and I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to surprise everybody and make it past the first round, but Detroit's been on the way up for a while, and apparently Javier Baez is an obstacle to that as opposed to an enhancement. And we're seeing it in the way this team has gelled around their young core without him in the last couple of months. And you look at the schedule, we've got soft swing Baltimore up next. We've got Tampa Bay, who, do they really care to keep Detroit out of the playoffs enough to play with fervor? Maybe they don't. And finally, the White Sox, who can't, realistically stop, anything. So this Detroit team's runway is pretty clear after how they set themselves up by winning 5 out of 6 against the Mariners. And that's just the reality that justifies why Detroit is to be feared. They figured it out, and they're just breaths away. If any more things pan out their way, this team is going to sneak into the playoffs, and we get to applaud them instead of Boston, Minnesota, or Seattle. And that is a shocker, I'm sure, for a lot of us on this.
Are they? Yeah. Are the Tigers this year's Reds? Would you say? Kind of how they came on last year.
They're two different philosophies, right?
Well, yeah, I just mean in like the kind of I look at it like the in the same way the Reds last year. We see the Tigers this year kind of you can call it mid rebuild. But you're just starting to see like the fruits of that, see like some of the younger players producing, kind of like at the Reds last year. I mean, half the team was young or rookies, or 2 years ago. And then it built.
Would you say you're
asking made that run where they all started clicking at the end of the year? Like, is that kind of what's going on in Detroit?
Are you trying to ask me if Detroit, here, one other way of rephrasing that to see if I can give you my best answer. Are you saying that, are you asking me if Detroit is the best team to not make the postseason at this stage? Maybe is that your comparison?
Yeah, I guess you could. That's pretty much what the Reds did last year. So yeah, if they miss,
then for me it was actually Seattle that was the best team that missed the postseason last year. So that's who I would compare them. In my opinion, Seattle was half a game away, right? It took to the second to last day of the season for us to fall out. So that's who I would compare this Detroit team to if they fail at this point, because the runway is pretty clear. And I really do feel that way. I think they could take 2 or 3 of 3 from Baltimore. I definitely think they could sweep the White Sox to end their season. And in between those two series, I do think they have what it takes to win 2 of 3 from the Rays. So that's the team I think has the runway. So we'll see if
more hope than I do, but we'll see what happens.
I think the word hope is loosely used. I almost picked this team to win the division and then chose at the last second to swerve over to Cleveland. And now they're the team I might have to submit just takes it from Seattle. Seattle gave it away. is more likely. So that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, for crying out loud, let's just get Seattle out of the way, guys. I am so exhausted waiting for it. Honestly, the vibes and expectations weren't necessarily like empty this week. We did go 8-6. We did not like what happened against the Yankees yesterday. That felt like the ceremonial cast off of our season in my mind. 11-2 is a terrible way to lose after wearing your City Connect jerseys like 5 days in a row because you just kept winning, and that was lovely. Taking series from Texas, splitting a series with San Diego, taking 2 of 3 from St. Louis, splitting 4 with Oakland. Most of that was good news for us. The Oakland split a little regrettable, sure. But truthfully, I feel like last week I called us done, hoping that the juju would rebound and we would do enough to clench our fist even harder around a playoff roll. And we clinched, but we didn't clinch as fully as I wanted, clearly. And definitely getting your butt handed to you by the Yankees yesterday tells me that, it is what it is. We are still not quite ready to be an upper echelon American League playoff contender. Brian Wu, the pitcher who's been the most exciting for us, gave up 7 runs, right, to those Yankees before getting pulled in the 4th inning after 4 2/3. That's a pretty smart way of saying, if you're the Yankees, hey guys, you're not on our level. So do I want to truly believe we're not on their level? No, but I had us riding the hottest starting rotation in the league into the playoff. And guess what, guys? Here in the penultimate week of the season, it's not the Boston Red Sox or the Philadelphia Phillies who have the best ERA in Major League Baseball. It is the Seattle Mariners, but that hasn't equated to a clinched playoff run, has it? So I have to say, I don't think we're going to make it. I'm bummed. On the plus side, I do think we have our playoff or our outfield of the future. I think if you're watching Victor Robles, Randy Rosarena, and Julio Rodriguez feed off each other right now, like they've started to over the last winning week, I would say, then you want nothing to do with trading Randy Rosarena in the offseason. You want to pay him the money we need to pay him because the fans are motivated to watch that 162 times a year. We want to see those 3 guys grow up together, and for the next 2 years, we should be allowed to see that. In the infield, our question marks can be around Luis Urias. Maybe we move him to second base and move Jorge Polanco because I don't think Polanco did what he needed to do. Is Luis Urias even factoring in? Is Josh Rojas even factoring in? Both of them had different paths to mediocrity, where Rojas was invested in for the most of the year while Urias was down in the minor leagues, and now they're both up and they're both mediocre. But I like Urias's power personally. Yada, yada, yada. I've talked about how I would trade JP Crawford away for an upgraded shortstop, and I think a lot of the fan base is starting to feel that way too, which is a bummer. He could have been he was brought in to be a centerpiece of our culture.
His trade value might be gone though.
Yeah, it could be,
unfortunately,
because he did take another big step back. So what would we be getting? I don't know. But the truth is, we've got prospects in our bank who could be ready to step into a role, as well as I said, Ryan Bliss. I don't sleep on him as a potential second base or shortstop piece of our future. I like a Ryan Bliss a lot. I like his speed. I like Raley. Luke Raley at first base for me seems like the answer, and he and Cal Raleigh want to be best friends and play in Seattle for the foreseeable, so I love that we have that. There aren't too many question marks I have. The possibility is that we might trade one of our starters and try to accumulate some assets. Maybe a Luis Castillo could be on the move. Maybe a Logan Gilbert can be on the move. Not my personal first choice of steps to make over the offseason, but I'm not in control of my organization. I prefer us keeping a pitching team that seems so gosh darn strong unless we bring in a separate starting pitcher as we trade one away, like a Castillo for who was the guy you threw out there earlier that made me go, oh, maybe Teal and Black we were talking about. Anyway, the point is we're not too far away from who I think we can be, and I think our new coaching changes will make us a better team next year. I just wanted it to be this year. I think a lot of us did. So it's very deflating. All right, Dan, I talked too much. Your turn.
I just had two questions for you, Warren. I mean, first, I wanted to say, like, it has to be said, the offense in the second half of the year is greatly improved, greatly improved.
Sure.
And, whatever you want to connect that to, the manager, the acquisitions, whatever it is, I don't know if the strikeout rate is actually lower over these weeks than it had been, but the offense is up, runs scored are up. Can't ask for a lot more than the pitching staff. I think that's a huge plus. I like everything you said on next year. I was just going to ask you on first base, like obviously JT, it seems like he's done pretty well there, but I think pretty obviously that's not going to be a plan for you going forward, at least probably not. Is that something like I see you got Tyler Locklear in the system? Is that something you're going to let him start, or do you think first base might be one of the positions you go after in the offseason?
No, I'm pretty sure that Luke Raley, who's been playing a lot of first base the last couple of weeks and also rounding into form at the plate enough where he'll stop swinging at certain pitches that go into the ground and become grounders eventually. I do think Luke Raley is a more likely piece at first base for us of the future right now than a Tyler Locklear, who's still reliably down in minor league baseball. So I like Rayleigh there, and especially with the outfield now becoming a Rosarena, Robles, and Julio, with maybe Dom Canzone as the fourth, as Haniger, I would expect, is not going to be on this team and certainly not playing impactful innings much longer. I love Mitch Haniger. He's been huge for us, but I've already spoken in that circle, so you don't need me to remind you of that. But yeah, I like Rayleigh at first, and he and Cal have built this immediate camaraderie that's so cool. So it makes sense that he be first to Cal's catcher, right? At least for the next couple of years. So that's my hope.
And then also, you guys actually, at least so far, have managed a 25-18 record in division, which is the best of the AL West in division record. So definitely check that box this year. But I know we're not done with the year yet. I know you say there's probably out of it. I was going to ask you, is there enough time? But you kind of answered that already. So I would just say, you talked about basically that extra half game last year, and then the experience that kind of drove the team to make the decisions they did this year, and the way that they built the team to win the way they have. I mean, they are over 500, and they could well finish below 500. So even with the changes you've kind of talked about, is there anything else that needs to change next year? Like keep the manager, bring in a different one, or anything else that has to kind of kick them over the top?
I'm already hearing really compelling conversations happening between new hitting coach and Mariners Hall of Famer Edgar Martinez with the lineup. So I'm not worried there. Dan Wilson, statistically, we've been better under Dan Wilson so far. So there's no reason the organization would move away from him at this point. So there's no point me asking for it, and I wouldn't. So no worries there. As I mentioned, I do feel like question marks around second base, shortstop, third base remain our biggest question marks on the infield. I think our outfield set, love first base, love catcher. And I think we can only choose to cause turmoil at the starting rotation. We shouldn't really make changes on paper with the number 1 ERA in the league, but there is buzz around the idea of trading a starter for something. And
if that's what it takes, I get it, but it could also fire.
Yeah, I know. I think the most likely to be traded, if I have it my way, is Castillo, because Castillo's the oldest of the group. We know the most about what he's about, and he's had the most control issues this year. I would be heartbroken to lose a Logan Gilbert, but that's the only other starter I've heard any buzz about trading at this point. So that's where I can leave that. I would prefer no changes to the rotation overall, unless I'm getting somebody on paper that is equal to or extensively better than Castillo. He's the one I would drop first. No offense to Castillo. He's a great source of the culture. I like his personality. It's just, he's the one I would part with if I had to, but I don't really want to. And I love Woodward as our pitching coach because, again, number 1 ERA in the league, just as I said we would be. Unfortunately, it didn't do what I said it would do. At least not yet. We got 7 days to figure it out, but I'm not putting money on it. And Thank you for 9 minutes of Mariners conversation. You guys are so kind. If you lasted this long, I'm grateful to put them in the ground. We'll see where we are at the end of the season 2 weeks from now,
I'm still
literally.
rooting for you guys. Still
And
think
I
you
love
can
you for that. I
get
love you
somewhere.
for that, man. And I'm rooting for your guys. I mean, I'm glad that our co-hosts can appreciate each other. But at the end of the day, I want our team to be definitively better, not questionably better. This year is still a little itty bitty bit of a disappointment, to say the least. But I do like that we're moving forward with new brains at the helm. I like Edgar and I like Dan Wilson. So we'll see. I would expect us to be infinitely better next year. I'm done now. It's time for number 6. We've hit it. Our top 6 teams are here. And guys, they're all compelling in so many different ways. Who will be your first stop on this Russian roulette towards the end of our penultimate episode of Covering Our Bases, my guy?
It's been a long road to get here, but I think we got to talk about Milwaukee, Warren.
Ladies and gentlemen, the first team to clinch their division as of this afternoon is the Milwaukee Brewers. Yet, absolutely, they did have the most mediocre week of those contenders left to discuss. You still have to, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm personally going to say this is my favorite team. This is my favorite. This is my favorite story of the year.
Okay.
Is how Jackson Chourio has burgeoned into, especially here in the second half of the season, a legitimate piece of your future. Bryce Terrain is rounding into form as more than just your stolen base guy. He's getting great base hits, fantastic contact. Right. Basically, your Luis Arias, right? You got William Contreras is your spark plug, your heat pump. And then on top of that, as if you needed any more reassurance, you've got, Willy Adames out in shortstop, pumping out more 3-run homers than many franchises in all of baseball have been able to muster all by himself. What a compelling team. Devin Williams, one of the best closers in the league, is back, closing it down for this team. And Freddie Peralta has maybe been the biggest pitching piece that's stayed tried and true throughout the whole year for a rotation that should have given this division away, but hasn't. It's just a huge underdog story paying off in a major way, especially since losing Yelich to injury. Yeah. And yet they still have the biggest run differential in the entire league. It's not the Yankees. It's not the Dodgers. It's not the Phillies, and it's not the Braves. It is the Brewers.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. So tell me about it. How come they're not even higher as the only clinched playoff team in the league at this moment?
It's a good point. 500 baseball was decent, but there's definitely some games you got to win there. Clinching the division, clinching the playoffs is huge. They kind of did what they had to do. Like, this is the type of situation where I would say you want to back off now. Fine, you clinch. That's okay. They will probably not have a bye, though, and it could change, but it is more than likely that they will not have a bye. So it is important that they're playing good baseball, because they will go right into a wild card series against that last National League wild card, whether that be the Mets, the Diamondbacks, or maybe somehow Atlanta. I think for any of those teams, it's a tall task for the Brewers, so it should be about trying to set yourself up for that. Unfortunately, Brandon Woodruff just got hurt. And I'm sorry, not Brandon Woodruff. He got hurt a long time ago. My mistake. I lost the name, but they lost the pitcher, and they've moved DL Hall back into the rotation. And I can't help but laugh, because he started the year on the rotation, and they've made obviously a lot of moves at their pitching staff. And he's been the plug-in guy wherever they can kind of throw him in for a start. He's been relatively okay, and as long as you're looking at a 3-game wild card series where you can roll out like a Peralta, Montas, and then maybe a Savali or something, then you could play this next week knowing that you could start those guys early, get them some rest, and let them roll. And as far as like this next week going forward, if I'm Milwaukee, like that's what I'm focused on. You mentioned Jackson Chourio. He's my rookie of the year, Warren, in the National League. I don't know about you, but of all of the Jacksons, he's certainly been almost the most consistent, and his power has really come through this year. He's already had a 20 stolen bases and 20 home runs in his first year. Is extremely impressive.
Impressive.
And I remember looking at this team at the start of the year and being kind of about them, but they've really proven themselves. Even a lot of their younger players, that Joey Ortiz is another younger guy they gave a chance to, and he's done well enough to stick with the lineup. Rhys Hoskins and Willie Adames are probably going to be free agents. That's pretty much it. So this team can and Freddie Peralta more than likely, and obviously Frankie Montas, but this team can definitely roll some strength into next year. And I think about, is there any team that we counted on less than the Milwaukee Brewers? If you had to bet of the 7, 8, 12 teams that would clinch and the order they would clinch, I don't know that anyone would have picked the Brewers to be the first team to clinch, Warren, like you said, ahead of all these other teams and to have the best run differential. So even when I sit here now and say that they should take a drop off next year, I don't believe it myself, because they can go and make 1, 2, 3 acquisitions and make a huge difference. We should remember this is a team that lost Craig Counsell this year. Like you said, they lost Yelich. It's not like they haven't had adversity. They've had plenty of adversity, and they persevered.
We've been waiting for their arms to fall off for 6 months, This is just such a cool story and such a compelling example of an offense refusing to fall behind their opponents and counterpunching so effectively in generally every turn. We have had them in the bottom third of our countdown, less than most of the contenders that have left that are left to be discussed. This is just arguably the most consistent team in baseball, and certainly the one amongst that conversation that we saw least coming. So it's just been a great story. One of your,
you can't even get it out, Warren, because I know how huge this team was for you, but I know that early on in the season you had pretty high expectations for them.
God, it's one of my favorites. That's all I'm trying to say. It's just a favorite.
You're real choked up about it. I get it.
I'm so choked up about it. God bless the Milwaukee Brewers. My God, I'm brewing up some tears. My fiance wonders if I need a friggin' Heimlich maneuver. I'm good, love. I just can't breathe. All right, everybody.
Water, dude.
Oh, yeah, I do have some water. How about that? That's fantastic. God bless the Brewers. You're brewing up a potential World Series run. Good on you. We'll see if that's the case, though. There's still 5 more teams, potentially more compelling than the Brewers. And because I have yet to regain my voice with some composure, I'm just going to say San Diego's next, Dan. San Diego will take the 5th spot. They had just slightly fewer wins than the remaining camp. And yes, they're chasing these Dodgers down aggressively.
Yeah.
A real shot to catch them. That is a storyline I don't think you or I banked on too much. And the truth is that they've done so much to adapt to the, roller coaster and marathon of the season. They've arguably been the best front office as the season has gone on. Yeah. Maybe Milwaukee can set themselves up as like the winner of that award from the beginning of this season. But during the season, San Diego brought in Arias, right? They were the last minute recipients of Dylan Cease's services, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they did so much to help make this work this year. Very compelling story and potential choice for front office of the year for me. Everybody's playing great baseball. The lineup is as potent as I suspected it could be, even after losing Juan Soto last year. It's honestly a better team, even without Soto, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it.
I was going to say that actually. I think it is a better team than either of the years Soto was there, which is crazy to think about. And those were great teams, but I agree. Yep. I think they're a better, more well-rounded team on both sides.
Yeah. This is a Padres team that made plenty of intelligent decisions to set themselves up to be a difficult out in the postseason and arguably at their strongest form right here, right now. And that is what you want. So I don't really need to, talk about the usual suspects from your Tatises to your Machados to your Arises to your role players like Jake Cronenworth or my pick for the National League Rookie of the Year in Jackson Merrill, the other Jackson.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not that pick.
I think he's getting popular, man, for that. Apart from Skeens, maybe is the biggest conversation that I've been hearing.
I think Skeens would have had it if he had not just been pulled early these last few starts. Yeah.
Maybe. And also he only pitched half the year. That should be something that matters in my opinion, no matter how good they are. But anyway, I'd even argue maybe Shota Imanaga could be a better recipient of the National League pitcher. Yeah. But anyway, Yeah, dude, San Diego's so darn good, and you've got to be salivating at the concept you brought up earlier of a Los Angeles and San Diego series in the postseason,
Yeah.
because it is a difficult one to call. Tell me more about the outside chance that maybe the Padres are our World Series winners this year.
Yeah, and there's absolutely a good chance for it. The rotation is well rounded. Yu Darvish came back recently, and he
Yeah,
has been great.
yeah,
Obviously, Cease is in great form. Michael King has really rounded himself together, and that's another example of like they threw him in it at the start of the year. He wasn't necessarily the strongest. They kept him in it. I remember us talking about it. I think I said like I think they should pull the trigger on King because it's not working out, and they let him power through it. And he now has a 3 ERA, and he's definitely going to be one of their 3 starters for this next round. So, and not
yeah.
to
King's
mention
a
the
dog, man. I'm a fan of
yeah,
King. I don't want to move him anywhere. I mean,
he put
unless
it together.
Bobby Miller's himself, you know.
Yeah, no, he put it together in a fantastic way. All of their bullpen acquisitions have been great. Tanner Scott is their perfect 8 setup guy now. Like they are ready for a deep postseason run. It's worth mentioning Luis Ariz. He had I think it was 120 at bats without a strikeout, which is the longest streak in 40 years that he just snapped, but insane. His batting average is up
Yeah,
to 320 now.
yeah.
Tatis just came back from injury a couple weeks ago, and he's been lighting it up since he came back more. And he was actually a little slower earlier at the start of the year. And there was talk in the organization about maybe since he came back after being out for a year and a half and then played the full year and then into this year after playing summer ball, that maybe he was a little bit of fatigue. Well, I mean, he recovered from his injury, got some rest, came back, and he's playing full strength, which is exactly what they need at this time of year. I think this team is built to beat the Dodgers. I'm really worried about them potentially matching up against them in that first divisional round. I'm really terrified that they get past us or Arizona. I believe that they can get past the Dodgers if they make it that far, if the Dodgers do too. And then you're talking about one round away from the World Series. So, yeah, I absolutely think this team can do it. I have seen them get that far and choke before. But as we said, this does seem like a stronger team, much more well rounded, much better bullpen. And I think that they're probably like them and the Phillies are the 2 teams I'm most scared of in the National League right now, Warren.
Hey, I mean, be afraid of yourself too. There's the teams that are making the playoff bracket. There's only a few that feel like they can't make it. You know what I mean? Maybe the Twins, maybe the Braves, maybe
Yeah.
the Tigers. But even the Tigers are blossoming at the right time.
Yeah. Diamondbacks are like,
Yeah, the Diamondbacks. It's hard to tell if they're like really how real their crappiness is
yeah,
really all I want to say. So the truth is, this is a great story because San Diego was certainly on the bubble of being either a team that could come in based on what was on paper and be a playoff team, hence why I picked the wild card for them, or they could have also been what you said exactly, the team that clearly was offloading payroll and was getting ready to take a step back and wasn't even ambitious enough to call themselves contenders, despite their clientele, or not their clientele, but their lineup at the beginning of the year. Well, they've proven that they have ambition after all, that they did a very quick version of a rebuild pretty admirably. And another reason why this, executive team might be front office of the year when it's all said and done, probably the most deserving, all things considered, and a great story. So, yes, we all should be holding our breath, wondering if San Diego and LA do cross paths in the postseason. If they do, yes, once again, let's get our one-time co-hosts up into this conversation and have them
definitely.
tell us who really will reign supreme, because it's not as straightforward of an answer as we ever imagined. Most definitely heading into the final week of the year. All right, 4 teams are left. I know that you need to go to work soon. We've had a great conversation. It's a bummer to think that our penultimate episode of the Vibe Check is nearing its final 4 bases, but we got to do it. Who's top 4 for you, Dano?
I'm happy to have them here. Let's talk about the New York Mets, Warren.
Yay, the last of the teams, right, for us to discuss today that neither of us had as a playoff contender at the beginning of the season with confidence. We said bubble team, and
Yes.
in many ways we did so lovingly. because
Yeah.
we didn't want you to feel like there wasn't a chance. But man, have they created that chance? And man, can they be synonymized as simply Francisco Lindor? And can he be healthy this last week of the season? There's been some concerns about that, and we don't want that for you, dude. Tell us how you're feeling about your Mets.
Yes. So I have to start with the Mets have gotten the most innings out of their starting pitchers over the last month of baseball, over 6, highest in the majors.
Sean Manaea has been incredible.
Yeah, and like McGill has performed really well. Peterson in his spots. Christian Scott just got announced is going to be getting Tommy John surgery, which kind of explains his struggles. But the rotation has been excellent. The bullpen has been really solid. Diaz has been giving up a lot of hits this year. When he doesn't have control over his breaking ball, he's consistently giving up. Not necessarily home runs. That was a different problem, but a lot of hits. He almost blew a save 2 nights ago because of this. And that's a concern for me going forward into the postseason in the last week of the season.
Understandably.
They've given him some opportunities to win back some confidence, and he's won several games, but I haven't seen that 2022, 2021 Edwin Diaz yet that I know Warren. So we're still seeing if he can recapture that form or not. But yeah, the important thing you mentioned it, Francisco Lindor, he had an MRI on his back. He's missed the last 3 games. He actually came off the bench for 2 of them. He made it his goal to play every game this year. And he started I think he got up to 140 before getting hurt. Very unfortunate. His defense has been superb this year, like stellar. He has been the leader of the infield with Alonso on first and kind of a rotating cast all around them. We've solidified since Jeff McNeil got hurt, Jose Iglesias has stepped up to be our second baseman, and he's been huge. He's hitting 330 right now. He's already up to, I think right now let me double check. Yeah, he's at 3 home runs right now. He has a walk-off. Jesse Winker has a walk-off. Bader has a walk-off. So it's not all coming from one piece of the lineup. It's getting spread around. Offense is clicking just the way we needed it to. We called up a couple of younger prospects. Eddie Alvarez is one of them who's gotten some playing time. We've been kind of given a chance to, you might have heard of this one, Warren, Luis Angel Acuna, Robert Acuna's little brother.
Yes.
He went 3 for 4 last night with an RBI and double. He's been playing really, really well and only has a handful of plate appearances, 11, I think it is, and he's hitting technically 455.
The Ron Acuna died.
The new Acuñas, that is going to be something for us. So yeah, we have the depth that we need. I'm really confident of this team going forward. We have already staggered and set up our bullpen so that we have our 3 best starters. We're going to have Manaea, Quintana, and probably Peterson going in against the Braves. That's going to be a huge matchup. We do have a series against the Phillies coming up. That's going to be not quite as huge, but if potentially we can win that series and the Braves series, now you're talking about potentially jumping a few spots up further into the wild card. And that series with the Braves will determine whether they're going to jump in and take our spot, which I'm honestly not confident they will. I'm very confident in the Mets right now.
I'm glad that you could be confident. I'm excited to think you'll return to playoff baseball. You do have, I don't know if there's a tougher National League schedule to end the season on. I mean, Phillies, Atlanta, Milwaukee.
Yeah,
you got to hope that Milwaukee doesn't feel like winning any more games because they've done what they need to do, right? To allow you in. It is all about Atlanta. It's huge. Yeah. It is a huge, huge series that's happening in 4 or 5 days time. So
yep.
I will pray for you.
Milwaukee beat us earlier this year. So I don't count that out either. Like I said, if we're only a game or 2 up on the Braves, I'd still be worried about that last series.
Yeah. All 3 of these series to end your season are postseason previews. So, make them all count. Let's all root for Dan's Mets. He's got the best clear shot at a postseason. My heart's with you, man. I would love to see it. And, gosh, go get it, man. Go absolutely get it is all I wish to say. I believe.
And Warren, you won't believe it, but when Alonso was this is the Mets' last homestand currently that they're on when they wrap up against the Phillies. So, of course, Alonso was asked if he thinks this will be his last game at home in a Met uniform. And he said, no, I don't think it will be. And they were like, oh, is that because you're going to play in the postseason, you think? Or because you'll be back next year? And he was like, maybe both.
Yay.
Oh, that's a good sign. And I said at the start of this year would be the indicator for if Alonso is going to resign or not, based off of how the team performs and the vibes. And I think when Lindor went down, Alonso was very vocal in the locker room about wanting to win with these guys. He talked about how he hasn't had a chance for that playoff run since 2020, which was the pandemic year. And I don't know if you can even count that. So this is a huge opportunity. And I think if we do well, maybe Alonso will sign on the dotted line.
I'm happy for you because I know that's what you want. And that's like me hearing Cal Raleigh is getting ready to extend for another 6 years in Seattle. That would be like, I invite you to get into a hot tub and relax for a bit, my guy. That is what you should feel in terms of relief. Is that Pete clearly isn't counting out the fact that he wants to be there, and playing with Lindor should be just as appealing as playing with any other top level star around the league. So good, man. I'm glad that that's how you get to take away from that conversation, because I would certainly be breathing a little easier. Not that I have today for whatever reason. All right, guys. Well, from New York to New York, the truth is it's obvious that the Yankees need to be next when you look at the win columns of the remaining teams. This is just simply the team that's lost just a little bit more than the others. And I know you think I'm salty because they absolutely smacked us yesterday, 11-2.
Well,
what was fun about that was before the game, I heard an announcer explain that Juan Soto had a goal of hitting a home run in every single ballpark this year in major leagues, and that the Seattle Mariners ballpark was the last to fall.
Yes.
But fall it did when that 2-run homer came in the 7th inning or whatever it was. Listen, I smiled to myself because I've caught myself saying the sentence that if the Yankees won this year, I wouldn't hate it. The thing is this is a team that's also been built to do well. And if they get to win, then cool. They figured it out. They were the organization that put all the pieces together. Juan Soto's diabolical. Alex Verdugo's been an amazing defensive piece, but also offensively enough is the word I'll use. And Aaron Judge is your MVP of the American League, barring something silly and surprising happening. The Yankees are just a super tough team. But on top of that, Jason Dominguez did get called up since our conversation last time said that he wouldn't be involved in the postseason, but I don't know what we missed. He's here and he's doing stuff, and he could definitely be important for the Yankees in a postseason run that could benefit from young legs.
Warren, I don't know. I'm not sure he's eligible for the postseason because he was called up after the deadline.
So I feel you. There's the thing. I talked to somebody who's a Yankee fan who works at my new job, guys, and he says, "Oh yeah, he'll play in the postseason." So I don't know what I'm missing, or if he's missing something, or if what's going on. But the truth is that Jason's here now and he's doing stuff. This Yankee team, again, was built to win. So they look poised and ready to do so. There's still one more American League team we haven't discussed, and they've been arguably even more surprising. No, I mean, the Yankees being successful this year is not surprising. So the other team is surprising. This one, you just had to expect it was going to happen. And did you expect it to happen, Dan? How do you feel about the Yankees entering the final week of the season?
Yeah, I will say I can't say I expect it to happen. I do want to say really quick, Warren, you're correct. He is eligible because he was in the minors before the deadline, but he was still on the 40-man roster, and that's why he's eligible.
There it is.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. The Yankees have definitely had the shaky start to the season, but solidified. You mentioned Aaron Judge. My thing I'm watching for is the Triple Crown. He is second in batting average right now. If he can get that clip up to number 1, he would get the Triple Crown, which would be amazing. 53 home runs as it stands. So even if he doesn't break his own record, it's still an incredible number. I gotta say, I've been rooting for Bobby Witt Jr. to be the AL MVP for a lot of the year. And the impact he's had on the team, this consistency he's had throughout this entire year, and him driving the team into a playoff position from where it was not. For me, it pushes him over in terms of being MVP, but from a numbers perspective, I understand. if it's Judge. I wouldn't be unhappy with that at all. And Warren, I wanted to point out that I talked about last time the issues that they've had with a closer, and they've kind of been a rotating role. They've put Luke Weaver solidly in that position now, and he's done a lot better over these last 2 weeks.
Oh my God, of course.
Yeah, so that's kind of solidified. That was kind of their biggest question mark going forward. So it's really good to see them solidify that. And like you mentioned, Jason Dominguez is an upgrade in the field. Like any way you slice it is just much better.
It's crazy that Luke Weaver can be an answer for a top tier American League contender at closer. We had Luke Weaver for a cup of coffee in Seattle last year.
Yeah.
He pitched like 3 games for us and then was DFA'd. And I just thought to myself, like, that seemed like a career on the downturn. So to see him brought in by a Yankee squad and being able to put in that position just makes me shake my head and remember I have so much to learn. That's just amazing to me that Luke Weaver was an answer in that role in such a major way. But okay.
You never know.
You never know.
Yeah, Warren, I got a fun question for you. You mentioned Juan Soto.
Yeah.
And, he now is one of 3 active players to homer in all 30 ballparks. Can you name the other 2? And I'll give you.
Oh, your audio broke out. What was my hint? I need a hint. Nope, you're muted. Oh, my sad face. I have to wonder. Well, there we go. Now we're starting to hear you a little bit. There
so your hint is 1. So it's 3 active players, Juan Soto, and then 2 others.
Yeah.
Of the other 2, 1 is currently his teammate, and the other was previously his teammate.
Is 1 Bryce Harper?
No.
Okay. Just wanted to try.
I don't know if they overlapped in Washington either.
I'm probably going to embarrass myself a lot. Is Judge the other one?
No, Judge is a good guess. It's not an easy question. It's not Judge though.
I'm just going to take a long time to embarrass myself, guys. This is fun. Make me sweat in it. It's okay. Give me like a minute of sweating. And if I don't get it, save my butt. Gleyber Torres.
No,
I hate my life. Giancarlo Stanton.
Yes.
Yay. I got one. And now
that's
one
his current teammate.
Juan Soto's former teammate is next.
Right.
Manny Machado.
Yes. Wow. Great job.
Let's go.
Very good.
Go.
Those are your 3 actives.
Sick. I feel less embarrassed than I expected to be.
Nuts that Manny and Giancarlo Stanton are in their late 30s and they've done it. Soto is, hang on, let me double check. Yep, that's 26. Right. 25. Did he just turn 26? He's like,
no, I know. It was a guess. It was a guess.
Oh, yeah, I think he's still 25. So nuts.
Okay, well, Julio's next. Okay, and he's a whole year younger than Soto. So let's be excited next year. Okay. I think Julio's figured some stuff out. But again, don't make everything about Seattle.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, fine. One is the Yankees deserve to be right up here in this conversation. There's one more team from the American League we haven't discussed yet that barely deserved to be thought of on such an echelon. And then we have a certain National League team. I wonder which one Dan's going to make me discuss as the number 1 team in the league. Dan, you get the penultimate choice, my friend. Who's the number 2 team in the league?
I mean, Warren, is it even a question? You know me so well. It's the Phillies.
Oh my God. It was going to be good. I think a Warren would have made me talk about the Phillies, right? If it were me, yeah. I would have made you have to do that.
I do legitimately have now. Our last 4 rankings worked out exactly how I have them. So
nice. Impressive. Our brains, unfortunately, guys, are not super different, but they're different enough, I'd like to think, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Okay. Talk to us about the Phillies and how you can throw them under the bus one more time, even if that bus is just second place.
Yeah, listen, that's still obviously really good.
So good.
Yeah. So a couple of the negatives we'll start off with. Nola has seriously struggled in his last 2 starts. He's allowed 10 earned runs, which is very, very not good.
Yeah.
In addition to that, Suarez is currently kind of going through a little bit of a rut at a really bad time. They're going to rest him for a while, hoping that maybe it's just his pitch count getting a little high.
Mm-hmm.
He since June 19th, Ranger Suarez has a 2-6 record and a 5.61 ERA. So he is very much going in the wrong direction, not what they want to see. Obviously, that 4-game matchup against the Mets is going to be pretty big. But, I mean, what it's going to come down to for this team is resting and then getting into the bye, right? Just ending this last week on a high note. Technically, they haven't clinched the division yet. If the Mets sweep them, there is a chance the Mets can go for it. I don't think that's very likely. I think they will take the division and they will lock up the first seed. Interesting note, the Phillies are one of only 2 teams with a winning record against all other postseason contenders this year. One of only 2 teams. The Padres are the other one. So, like I mentioned, 2 of the teams I would be really concerned about. The Phillies just seem to me like very much prepping for, what we talked about at the start of the year. It's all been about the postseason for this team. They're getting into that mode right now. They certainly look strong enough to make a deep run. And, I will say the pitching is better than it was last year, but we're seeing a little bit of a weak point, a low streak right now. And even though the bullpen is still very good, I would still be concerned about the streakiness of the offense, which has been an issue all year. I'll keep saying it as we go into the postseason. I would be very worried about that because we're still seeing it.
Yeah, the word very worried. I don't know if I'm very worried because Brandon Marsh has solidly become a great third bat behind your Turner and your Schwarber, out here. Bryce Harper, too, obviously. Like, there's a pretty deep lineup. And I suggested maybe a good 2 months ago that this was the most stable baseball team out there. And then they went and they had a couple weeks where you got to throw them in the 20s because what were they doing? They're doing all their soft landing, I think, early, right? As opposed to Kansas City and Baltimore softly landing now. Like they licked their wounds a little early and are now building that consistency that makes it really hard for me to believe that they are the first round out this year. They are really, really tough to see losing out of any series, but so are the Padres and so are the Dodgers. It's amazing. The teams that are getting to the dance, this bracket is loaded. And I guess I have to say, I think Philadelphia still is the most stable baseball team heading into the playoffs because of exactly what I just mentioned, man. They did their break taking a couple weeks earlier and they're not doing it now. So, I'll just leave it at that. I've said for a while, I just think they're that stable and their play is speaking for themselves at this moment. And I'm a big Brandon Marsh fan, so I would not hate the idea of watching this team go all the way. I'm also a Kyle Schwarber fan, actually. So, good luck to your Mets and good luck to everybody else who would stand in the way of the Phillies, but they do seem like the team I would vote to come out of the National League, and I know that's still saying a lot when you look at San Diego or Los Angeles or Arizona. Or Milwaukee. Like, it's crazy. Everybody else, like, this is a great bracket if it shapes up the way it's going to. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to play Philadelphia if it were and I know that's not the most intelligent breakdown of my fear, but you said it yourself. You kind of laid it all out, what could be the ways that they fall, and I just need to see it for myself. I'm not convinced they're going to be the easiest out ever by any stretch of the imagination. But Dan, gosh, that leaves the Cleveland Guardians as the number 1 team in the league. The team that I picked to win the American League Central on quite the whim, and what has turned out to be one of the most compelling divisions in baseball in the last several years. And one of the biggest reasons why we simply have to give some love to Cleveland is that I think they're 1 save away. I think Emmanuel Clase is 1 save away from setting a new record in single season saves. And, we've talked about how important a closer role can be. And I think Cleveland at number 1 at this stage of the season is the biggest piece of evidence to how amazing a closer can provide a sense of comfort and stability to a team who otherwise, man, we've talked about all year, their pitching has inspired very little comfort outside of this amazing back of the bullpen, this one of a kind soon to be likely historic back of the bullpen.
Yeah.
And you look at the offense carried by a Baltimore-like, series of sure bets like Jose Ramirez and Stephen Kwan, right?
Yep.
But they're accented by all of these offensive pieces that have found ways to contribute, from your Will Brennans and your David Frys. The list goes on and on. This has just been such a cool Cleveland team. And now, I'm talking about them like they're the hardest out in American League bracket that is full of difficult outs. So how do you feel about Cleveland being the number one team in our final breakdown before the end of the regular season? It seems crazy because this team has had plenty of ups and downs, but I think they've also earned it because I've compared them the most to a Milwaukee Brewers team over the years or over the season. And it's mainly because the pitching has had to be, buoyed by an incredible offense, but they've also benefited from having the best back of the bullpen, arguably in the history of the game, and almost will be, it's just about to happen. So it's just cool. It's cool stuff, man. I didn't think Emmanuel Clase was going to be the reason why this team eventually maybe was as stable as they turned out to be, but I think it's undeniable at this stage.
Oh,
so
yeah.
talk to me on your perspective of Cleveland, and then we will take this baby home.
Yeah, you're right on Clase. 46 saves and a sub-1 ERA is insane.
Unbelievable.
They've been getting contributions all over the lineup, like obviously Naylor and Jose. Kwan is hurt, has been for the last week, and should be able to come back. He has a mid-back inflammation. But he's actually, I was a little disappointed before that. I wonder if that injury was maybe something he was nursing for a while, because obviously he was leading the American League in batting average until he got hurt. And even when he came back, he was hot for a minute there, but he dropped off pretty massively from what we saw at the start of the year. So, that's a huge contributor for them. And not like they need him, but that does hurt not to have him if he doesn't come back healthy. And then Alex Cobb is currently on the IR. He should be back for the postseason, but this is another team that's probably going to get a bye. Probably looking at like a Houston or a Minnesota or one of those teams when they do play in the DS. And obviously you're talking about leaning on the bullpen for that, but I keep saying obviously, but it's not obvious is I guess what I'm trying to say. Is your starter going to be BB? Is it going to be Gavin Williams? Are you going to let one of your later inning guys for like a game 3-4, like a Cantillo or a Lively start? Or do you just do like a bullpen day like you've done in the regular season that's worked really well? They're going to have a lot of question marks for how they want to run things once they get there. But 2.68 ERA for the bullpen, I don't see how you could be any happier going into the last week of the season. And almost certainly will wrap up the division title. That's something that was a great call by you at the start of the year, Warren. Obviously, team I picked is going to finish just one spot shy of that, but you nailed it.
It's just luck, brother. It's just 100%, 1,000,000% luck.
You saw it and you called it.
Well, Jose Ramirez is the superstar that Bobby Witt's grown into, not that Jose Ramirez is a speedy or they don't do identical things, but Jose Ramirez controls that lineup. And it just seemed premature to write off that core as not capable of getting to the playoffs. And, your call on Kansas City being breathing down their necks was just as good. So I think this has been a great division for our fandom, I would say. But that being said, it's great to see that it's not a Baltimore and it's not a New York, right? It's not the team that either built itself up purely from the ground up or the one that bought its way in. It's the team that has come back from the dead, that this storyline presents. And I just think it's super cool. I love Stephen Kwan to death. I love those contact hitters, man, so much. I like people who don't selfishly swing out of their boots all the time because I'm getting sick of watching Seattle try, Just get on base and do stuff. And you never know what will happen. And I just love that philosophy for this team offensively. But also, I think Emmanuel Clase is one of the biggest BAs in the entire league. BA means bad, A, 2 S's. Okay. Like, it's just sick to watch him work. And every time they say book it when he gets a save, I get chills. So the next one's going to make Cleveland history.
Yep.
And it's bound to happen. He's got 12 chances at it. And that is why Cleveland gets to be, well, on top of the pedestal in one of the most important weeks you can ask. And next week, next show, we're planning on doing it another Tuesday. Okay, so expected Tuesday, the one that's basically starting October as we get into the playoff bracket. So expect the 1st of October to be our next show. The vibes have been checked, my friend, and it has been a doozy of a breakdown. Thank you guys who made it through our longest show yet. We know we're good at this. We could take your whole afternoon if you choose to. Thanks for allowing us to do so. If you enjoyed any of the takes we had or want to bicker about them, please leave us some feedback. We oh so very much love it. Shoot us an email at coveringourbases@gmail.com. Let us know who your takes are in the comments below as far as who will win all of these various playoff positions. Who are you most lamenting didn't make it? Would love to know that. And who do you think is going to be the player we're all talking about at the end of this year's postseason? Is it Shohei Ohtani in his first playoff appearance? Could it be Bobby Witt Jr. in his own first playoff appearance? Could it be somebody we haven't thought about or talked about yet? Would love to know what's on your mind. And finally, let us know in the comments below if at number 30, you think the Angels have the longest trek up the mountain to determine themselves viable as a playoff contender anytime soon. Let us know if at number 20, the Oakland Athletics deserve better and their fans deserve better. I don't think any of us should argue that. Number 15, the Pittsburgh Pirates. Is it a symptom of them continuing the same trend? Are we going to be expecting a Skeens move in the next couple of years? Or is Skeens the new beginning of a culture in Pittsburgh that means staying afloat for a change instead of sinking to the depths of Davy Jones' locker? Let us know at number 10 if we're still sleeping on Los Angeles' chances of steamrolling the entire playoff bracket and we're just teasing ourselves thinking that it won't happen. I wouldn't blame you for having that take. But at number 5, let us know in the comments below if you think San Diego was built to be the Dodger beater. I think it's a smart choice at number 5. Can they truly be the Achilles tendon in the amazing run that the Dodgers have given us this year? And finally, at number 1, let us know in the comments below if you think Cleveland really is that cool. How awesome of a story to see them atop their division at this stage, and especially with how much Kansas City has risen. And just for fun, let us know in the comments below if you think Kansas City is going to truly make it to the World Series like Dan says. But Dan, anything for our fans before we call this trip around the bases well run?
No, that's it. In our next episode, we'll be wrapping up the regular season. And then after that, could probably expect Warren and I to make some brackets, kind of go head to head on that. That should be exciting.
Yeah.
And then we will probably take a look at our predictions. So I could see where we messed up, where we got right. We talked about it a little bit, but we'll see how we did at the end of the season, what we were right, wrong, all that stuff when all the series wrap up.
And yes, we'll make plenty of conversations over the offseason too. Don't expect us to melt away, but we'll decide how best to make content for you moving forward as the season winds down. If you have any suggestions, shoot us some emails. We definitely speak basketball and football probably next, right? And certainly some hockey.
Yes.
There's not enough hockey conversation happening between us. So anyway, if you want to hear more from other sports until we wait for baseball to return, let us know what you think with some feedback in the email or with some comments. And guys, this has been the longest goodbye possible. My name is A.L. Warren Sprague. That's been N.L. Dan Harrow. And thank you guys. We will see you next time we take a trip around the bases, baby. Play baseball next time.